Hello everyone, I am Don't Turn Around.
I know many of you enjoy listening to these videos as you fall asleep. So before you drift off, I'd love for you to leave a comment letting me know where in the world you're tuning in from. And if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Alright, now let's get comfortable, relax, and dive into tonight's case. Story 1. The internet is a vast and ever-expanding space. It has revolutionized the way we live, work, and play. With just a few clicks, we can access information from around the world, connect with our loved ones across long distances, and explore countless possibilities of entertainment. Ladies and gentlemen, it was a cold-blooded, premeditated murder. However, judging from the title of this episode, it's clear that we won't be discussing the marvels of the internet, but instead, how a man in China used the power of the internet to lure 6 people to their deaths. In September 2009, an online forum that catered to the homosexual male population in China was bustling with activity. The sheer volume of posts and comments shared would make anyone's eyes widen. The online forum was more than just a place for casual browsing or idle chatter, although that was a big part of it. It was also a hub of intellectual exchange, a space where users could engage with one another on topics that mattered to them. Whether it was politics, social justice, or sexual identity, there was always a conversation to be had. Most of them were fairly standard, nothing too out of the ordinary. However, there was one thread that had garnered a significant amount of attention from users. It was a thread where members could post ads for various services or requests, particularly those of a sexual nature. Among the various posts, there was one that stood out from the rest. It was written in Mandarin, and it detailed a rather specific request. Looking for northern men, aged 23 to 40, who would play choking games for money. At first glance, many users might have been taken aback by the ad's unusual nature. After all, paying men to engage in choking games for money was not something that many people would consider a typical or acceptable request. But despite its strangeness, the post had managed to attract a considerable amount of attention from users. While some individuals were merely curious about the ad, others were drawn in by the prospect of earning money, no matter how dangerous or taboo it may have been. As the days passed, the post continued to circulate within the community, drawing more and more attention. Until one day, the post was taken down and the author's account deleted. About a month later, an article appeared with a shocking headline. It read, "Homosexual karaoke singer tricks 6 men into hanging themselves to death." You're listening to Haynes, an Asian true crime podcast brought to you by MediaCorp and produced by One Up Media. This episode contains scenes of graphic imagery and violence. Listener discretion is advised. The user that had posted the ad was a 37-year-old man named Zhou Yuping. Zhou was born in 1972 in a small village located in the Hunan province of China. He was the second brother in a family of 3 children. Like most villagers at the time, the family lived inside a small earthen house that was slightly dilapidated. Zhou was described as a handsome and charming young man. He had a natural charisma and magnetism that drew people towards him, especially women. In 1989, Zhou enrolled in a high school specializing in art and joined a Chinese opera troupe as part of his curriculum. For someone like Zhou, this was a remarkable achievement, particularly given that education was not a top priority for many families at the time, with the primary focus being survival and making ends meet. News of Zhou's admission quickly spread throughout the village, sparking a great deal of admiration and envy among his peers and the community. According to a Chinese news source, the proprietress of a canteen in the neighboring village remembers Zhou as a particularly beautiful and intelligent child who had a natural gift for learning. He excelled in his studies and was frequently recognized as a top student in his village. Due to his good looks and charming personality, he was also constantly surrounded by female admirers. However, the overwhelming female attention wouldn't faze him, because it was during this time that he began to explore and understand his own sexuality. The women wouldn't matter to him because Zhou was attracted to men. This revelation was a significant moment in his life, and he began to grapple with his feelings and identity. Depending on the country, culture, and religion, societal views towards homosexuality can vary greatly. In some places, homosexuality is still considered taboo and illegal, while in others, it is more widely accepted and even celebrated. Coming to terms with one's sexuality can be a difficult task for many people. However, for someone like Zhou, it may have been an even greater challenge because homosexuality was not widely embraced in China. At the time, The prevailing cultural norms and values often dictated that heterosexual relationships were the only acceptable form of romantic relationships, and individuals who engaged in same-sex relationships could get stigmatized and marginalized by the broader community. The realization of his attraction to men was a difficult and emotional experience for Zhou, and it was exacerbated by the constant fear of his own parents disowning him if they ever found out. However, it was never made clear if his parents ever did so. Although a lot of the details about Zhou's early life are pretty vague, there was one source from a Chinese blog that shed light on an important moment of his life: the first time he opened up to a family member about his sexuality. In 1989, a teenage Zhou Yuping was feeling flustered. His family had been urging him to get married, and he knew that there were many girls who had liked him. However, he would always laugh off his family's requests. His cousin Jolie approached him and said, "Yuping, why haven't you found a girl yet? You know your parents are eager for you to get married." "Yeah, I'll look for one soon. Don't worry about it," Zhou replied with a smile. But Jolie could sense that something was bothering him. She sat down beside him, put her hand behind his back and said, "Tell me what's wrong. You're not gay, right?" For a moment, there was silence. "I'll find someone for you. Don't worry about it." Zhou laughed at her comment, relieved that she was willing to help, but also hiding the pain he felt inside. He knew that finding someone was not going to be the solution to his problems, but he appreciated his cousin's attempt to make him feel better. According to the source, Zhou's high school years were marked by immense pain and agony, leaving him with an ardent desire to lead a normal life. Specifically, he had expressed that if he were able to find a female partner, get married and have children, he would feel content and fulfilled. His inner turmoil and struggles would continue until he made the decision to drop out of high school in 1992, where he set forth on a brand new chapter in his life. He decided to move to Changsha, a city in the southern part of China, and eventually found his calling in life, singing. According to sources, Zhou's interest in singing can be traced back to his father, who was reported to be a skilled and accomplished singer himself. According to the village neighbors, Zhou's father had a talent for singing and was well known for his public performances in the village. It is said that Zhou was greatly inspired by his father's talent and musical abilities, which motivated him to follow in his footsteps. With his father's legacy serving as a driving force, Zhou adopted the stage name Daijun and embarked on a career as a karaoke singer. After some time, Zhou had begun to make a name for himself, earning a reputation and a small following among the numerous cabaret clubs in the cities of Changsha and his hometown of Xiangxiang. His musical repertoire included many popular songs, but he was particularly famous for his covers of Tungri, a renowned singer from Mongolia. Although Zhou Yuping had managed to achieve a certain degree of success, he was never quite able to attain the level of critical acclaim that he had hoped for. Nevertheless, he had led a fairly extravagant lifestyle. Zhou was known for indulging in luxurious perfumes and hosting multiple romantic partners at his residence. Perhaps this was the beginning of his downfall, because the next few years did not go very well for him. On the fateful evening of June 22, 2006, Zhou had arranged to meet a man at a hotel located in the Keifu district of Changsha. The details surrounding the initial connection between the two men are unknown. But when the two men met at a hotel, Zhou took advantage of the situation by drugging the man with sedatives and robbing him of 600 yuan and his mobile phone. 4 days later, the victim managed to track Zhou down and confronted him, leading to a physical altercation that was eventually broken up by policemen. Zhou was arrested and handed a 3-year prison sentence along with a 5,000 yuan fine. After displaying good behavior in prison, Zhou was released on parole in August 2008. But perhaps the ordeal had taken a toll on him, because he decided to give up his singing career altogether. A year after his release from prison, Zhou Yuping's life took a dramatic turn as he found himself drawn into the world of the internet. It was during one of his online searches that he came across a homosexual forum website. At first, he was cautious and hesitant, but as he delved deeper into the site, he realized that he could connect with others who shared his sexual preferences. But the deeper you dive into the internet, the darker it tends to be. Zhou spent weeks browsing the forum, and he became more and more intrigued by the content. Now, it wasn't just the world of homosexuality that captivated him. As he continued his online exploration, he found himself drawn to a more extreme form of sexuality. But before we continue, I'd like to tell you about another podcast from One Up Media. Empires is an immersive podcast that dives deep into the history behind the most successful businesses in Asia. Every week, you'll learn the history of its leaders, the decisions that have rippled across the industry, and the factors that allowed them to become the empires they are today. From triumphant victories to monumental failures, Empires gets you behind the scenes of some of the most successful companies in Asia. Empires, an Asian business podcast, is now available on Spotify. Link is in the description. Sadomasochism is the derivation of sexual gratification from the infliction of physical pain or humiliation, either on another person or on oneself. In other words, a sexual practice that involves deriving pleasure from pain, whether giving or receiving. For Joe, this hidden desire had never been revealed to anyone, not even during his previous relationships. He had kept this part of himself hidden away, perhaps afraid of judgment. But the anonymity provided by the internet allowed Joe to explore this desire. On the forum, he found a community of like-minded individuals who shared his interest in sadomasochism. But as he delved deeper into this world, his desires turned more extreme. It's reported that after Joe discovered this passion, he would quickly go on a posting spree. One of his posts was an advertisement in which he stated that he was looking for slaves to engage in choking games. In addition, whoever agreed to take part in his activities would be rewarded with money. Although the exact amount was never made clear. By slaves, Joe meant men from the Hunan province between the ages of 23 and 40 who were brave enough to partake in the games. These choking games involve players voluntarily choking themselves or each other, typically by hanging for erotic purposes. The goal is to endure the choking for as long as possible before signaling to the other player to release them, despite the blatant risks and potential danger of such an activity. Many people responded to Joe's post with great interest. They were drawn to the thrill and excitement of pushing their limits and exploring their desires just like Joe himself. The irony, however, was that Joe knew all too well the dangers inherent in these games and never had any intention of risking his own life by participating in them. Instead, he derived pleasure from watching others getting choked. According to reports, Joe had been scammed and catfished multiple times by potential participants, and the experience had left him increasingly frustrated. Again, the details of these incidents are fuzzy, but it was clear that Joe had reached a breaking point. On October 11, 2009, he sat down in front of his computer again, talking to another potential candidate named Fong. "I'll meet you at the guest house in Keifu. Don't be late," Joe typed with aggression, probably annoyed by his chats with previous respondents. "Okay, see you there," Fong replied almost instantly. The two men did meet at the guest house that day, and without hesitation proceeded to a room that had been reserved under Joe's name. As Fong prepared the ropes and the noose for the game, Joe noticed a piece of paper sticking out from Feng's bag. Upon closer inspection, he realized that it was a positive HIV test result. Joe couldn't help but feel overwhelmed with fear and uncertainty, but at the same time, he was pissed off. Meanwhile, Fong remained unaware of what Joe had just discovered. "I'm about to begin. Are you ready?" Fong said as he put his head through the noose. "Go ahead. Do it," Joe replied apathetically. Calm and relaxed, Joe watched on as Fong began to slowly suffocate himself with the noose. The atmosphere in the room became increasingly tense. Each passing moment was marked by the sound of Feng's labored breathing as he struggled to breathe. The veins in his head began to bulge out, his eyes widened with fear and pain, and his skin slowly started to turn a sickly shade of purple. The room was silent except for the sound of Feng's gasps for air, which grew more and more desperate as time went on. Feng struggled with all his might, his hands frantically signaling to Joe to release him. The sound of Feng's breath became weaker and weaker until it eventually trailed off into a deathly silence. Joe calmly observed the lifeless body before him before leaving the guest house without a second glance. This was a pattern that he would repeat over and over again, each time leaving a lifeless body hanging from the ceiling. Over time, Joe's twisted post on the forum drew the attention of many users, but as the number of victims continued to grow, so too did the attention of the police, who began to investigate the string of suspicious deaths. That's coming up in the next episode. On October 11th, 2009, at a hotel in Changsha, China, a staff member was going about her duties when she walked past a guest room that was emitting an unbearable odor. The hotel staff walked towards the room with a frown on her face. The pungent odor grew stronger with each step. It had permeated the surrounding area, making it clear that something was amiss inside the room. She knocked on the door, calling out to the guest, but there was no response. "Hello? Anyone there?" For a moment, she hesitated, her mind racing with all sorts of unsettling thoughts. What if there was someone dangerous inside? What if the source of the smell was something gruesome? With a deep breath, she steeled herself and unlocked the door, bracing for what she might find on the other side. As she cracked the door open, the putrid smell hit her with full force. She immediately covered her nose and mouth in disgust. The room was dimly lit, but she could see the eerie shadows on the walls cast by the drawn curtains. Her hand trembled as she reached for the light switch, hesitating for a moment before flicking it on. The hotel staff gasped and stumbled back, her hand flying to her mouth in shock. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest as she took in the grisly sight before her. There was a body hanging by the neck, swaying gently in the sudden light. You're listening to Haynes, an Asian true crime podcast brought to you by MediaCorp and produced by One Up Media. This episode contains scenes of graphic imagery and violence. Listener discretion is advised. Hours before the gruesome discovery, 37-year-old Zhou Yuping had arranged to meet a man named Feng at the guest house. As Zhou nervously waited for Feng to arrive, he couldn't help but feel a mixture of excitement and apprehension. He had been searching for a partner who shared his interest in his choking games for some time, and Feng seemed like the perfect match. Previously, they had exchanged messages on the homosexual forum website, and Feng was the first successful candidate for his choking games that actually appeared in person. Moments later, Feng arrived and Zhou felt a rush of adrenaline as they checked into the room, but then their evening quickly took a dark turn. Zhou had noticed a piece of paper in Feng's bag that turned out to be a medical report indicating that Feng was HIV positive. Zhou's frustration grew as he struggled to understand why Feng would agree to his sexual requests while keeping his HIV status a secret. The night that had started with excitement and anticipation had suddenly turned into a potential death sentence for Zhou. The weight of his anger and fear seemed to crush down on him, and it was enough for Zhou to ignore Feng's pleas to release him. Feng hung lifeless from a rope that had been secured to the ceiling. Minutes passed, and the sounds of his desperate struggle were eventually silenced. After receiving the report of the incident, the local police arrived at the guest house and quickly assessed the situation. Upon arrival, they were met by the lifeless body of Feng, who was hanging naked from a rope. The police carefully examined the body, taking note of any potential signs of foul play or evidence of suicide. The next day, a local Chinese news source released a brief statement about the incident, stating that on October 11, 2009, a man who was approximately 1.8 meters tall and weighed around 90 kilograms had died by hanging in a guest house located in Keifu district. However, no further details or information were provided regarding the circumstances surrounding the incident. Feng's death was ruled as a suicide, but this had initially raised doubts among the local police. The manner in which he was found hanging in the hotel room was suspicious, and there were several details that did not quite add up. Firstly, it's rather questionable that Feng would strip himself naked, leaving only his underwear on before putting his neck around the noose and taking his own life. Secondly, the fact that Feng chose to hang himself adds another layer of suspicion. Not only is hanging an excruciatingly painful and physically demanding way to commit suicide, it also requires significant preparation and strength. And this is even before considering the fact that Feng was physically larger than an average Chinese citizen. However, despite their reservations, there was no concrete evidence to prove otherwise. Now, the police were left with many unanswered questions and a lingering sense of unease. Several days later, on October 23, 2009, another man was found hanged to death in a different guest house that was also located in Changsha. But the bizarre and inexplicable circumstances of his death made the police scratch their heads in confusion again. Upon discovering the body, authorities noted that the victim was once again only dressed in a pair of underpants. To the police, this was a red flag. The sudden trend of individuals choosing to take their own lives was extremely disturbing. So much so that the possibility of a hanging cult was raised. But just like the first victim, there was no concrete evidence to suggest anything other than suicide. The next month, on November 4th, a man in his 30s checked into a hotel located in the Huxiang Cultural Market. It wasn't until later that day, when a housekeeper who had been tasked with cleaning the room discovered the lifeless body of the man, hanging from a rope tied to the ceiling. It seemed that history was repeating itself because another man was once again found dead under similarly mysterious circumstances. The only difference was that this time, the body was completely naked. Upon receiving the distress call, the police rushed to the scene and immediately began investigating. But despite their meticulous efforts, the investigation yielded no concrete evidence of foul play or anything to suggest that someone else was involved in the man's death. To make matters worse, just 11 days later, on November 15th, the police received yet another report of a potential suicide in a hotel room on Xiangchuan Road. Upon entering the room, the officers were met with the same chilling sight: the lifeless naked body of a man hanging from a rope tied to the ceiling. For suicide cases in different hotel rooms within the same city, coupled with the distressing similarities between them, surely this was something more than a coincidence. According to several sources, Joe would continue his twisted game with 2 additional victims, bringing the total number of his victims to 6. The details surrounding these last 2 incidents were not explicitly stated, but it is believed that Joe employed the same method across all of his crimes. Joe would use the online forum to seek out potential candidates. Once he had identified his targets, he would lure them to hotels or guest houses, and the games would begin. However, the game was rigged from the start, and the unsuspecting victims were only a pawn in Joe's sadistic scheme. Once his victims started to hang from the ceiling, Joe would ignore their pleas for help and leave them to die. Meanwhile, the police were now extremely skeptical of the sheer coincidence behind these cases. As a result, they reopened the investigations into each victim, determined to uncover any new evidence that might help shed light on the mysterious deaths. As they scanned through the intricate web of events, they discovered that although each victim was found in a different hotel room or guest house, the men were not from the same city. This raised questions about why the victims would travel here in the first place, and the possibility that they may have been intentionally targeted for a more disturbing reason. In addition, none of the victims had left the suicide note at the crime scene. Suicide notes are common in cases of suicide, as they provide insight into the person's state of mind and motives for taking their own life. If no letters or notes are found, it opens up the possibility that their deaths might not have been suicides after all, but rather something more sinister. The victims' financial status was also a point of interest for the police. They were all found to be semi-well-off individuals with no apparent financial difficulties. This could possibly mean that the victims could have been targeted for their wealth and status. These details, combined with the alarming coincidence in which they were discovered, led the police to investigate their deaths as not suicides, but rather homicides. Despite the lack of evidence tying Joe to the cases, the authorities were rapidly gaining ground, and Joe's luck was quickly running out. Because the authorities had discovered a crucial piece of evidence that connected him to the murders. Upon reviewing the guest logbook at the hotels where the victims were found, it was discovered that the name Joe had been used to book the hotel rooms for 2 of the victims. With over 20 million people in China bearing the name Joe, we don't know for sure how the police managed to identify Zhou Yuping. But it's believed that the police may have identified the actual Joe through witness interviews or by other means. They may have also obtained surveillance footage from the hotels or guest houses where the victims were found, which could have captured Joe entering or leaving the premises. What we do know is that after he was identified, the police began to delve deeper into his online activity, and it wasn't long before they discovered the advertisements for his sex games. The game that entails suffocating yourself or someone else for approximately 10 seconds to derive thrill. As the investigation deepened, a pattern began to emerge. All of the victims were homosexuals and members of the same online forum. Then, through analyzing messages and internet activity, police realized that all the victims had a common partner, Zhou Yuping. On November 28th, 48 days after his first victim was hanged to death, Zhou Yuping was tracked down and arrested. At the Changsha Intermediate People's Court, the trial of Zhou Yuping became a highly publicized event that drew intense scrutiny from both the media and the public. The revelations that emerged during the trial were also shocking and disturbing, leading to a deepening sense of controversy surrounding the case. One of the most controversial aspects of the trial was Zhou's defense. Throughout the proceedings, he steadfastly maintained his innocence, arguing that he was not as heinous as others had made him out to be. He claimed that he never wanted the victims to die, and that his game was just a game. One that involves intentionally restricting one's own oxygen supply for about 10 seconds to achieve hypoxic euphoria, which according to Zhou can heighten one's sense of arousal and pleasure. This defense stirred up a great deal of anger, particularly among those who had lost their loved ones because of his actions. Many people felt that Zhou was attempting to shirk responsibility for his actions, and that his defense was nothing more than an attempt to minimize his culpability. But Zhou was not finished with his controversial statements. He went on to claim that not only did the victims bring their own ropes, They were also well aware of the risks and consequences that came with the games. Furthermore, he added that many of the individuals that had participated were tall enough to reach the ground and could have saved themselves if they wanted to. This statement only added fuel to the fire, as many felt that Zhou was attempting to shift the blame onto the victims themselves. According to Chinese news sources, when asked if he had ever loved anyone, Zhou Yuping hesitated for a moment before responding. He admitted to having experienced love in the past, but he believed that his emotions were not genuine and merely false feelings. Furthermore, he added that he never had any real feelings towards the men that had participated in his games, and that their encounters were nothing more than fleeting one-night stands devoid of any meaningful emotional connection. Zhou's defense statements did not help him much. Instead, it deepened the sense of outrage and disbelief surrounding the case. Many people struggled to come to terms with the reality of what had taken place, and there were heated debates about the nature of responsibility, culpability, and consent in the context of extreme sexual behavior. Despite the tense courtroom atmosphere, Zhou Yuping's passion for singing continued to shine through. He even burst into song, performing a popular Chinese classic written by an artist named Zhao Lei, who is renowned for capturing the emotional sadness that accompanies separation. The lyrics, which included very poignant lines, were sung by Zhou with a deep passion. Zhou Yuping's trial lasted almost 16 months, but on March 29, 2011, the wait was finally over. The court established that Zhou Yuping was fully aware of the risks that came with the games he had orchestrated, and despite this, he still made the choice to take advantage of his victims and manipulated them into hanging themselves. He also refused to rescue them once they were in danger, allowing them to die and intentionally killing them. In total, 6 people lost their lives as a result of Zhou's actions, and given that Zhou had a previous conviction of robbery and was a repeat offender, the court deemed that a heavy punishment was necessary. Zhou was ultimately sentenced to death for intentional homicide and deprived of political rights for life. He appealed his conviction, but the higher court upheld the verdict, leading to his execution by lethal injection on August 29, 2014. Justice had been served, but it's worth noting that although Zhou's crimes were indeed heinous and unforgivable, he did have a hard time dealing with loss and rejection in his early years. Several online articles stated that Zhou's life was marked by the tragic deaths of important family members, including his own father, who was violently beaten and killed during Zhou's youth. Furthermore, Zhou had to deal with disapproval from his mother and sister regarding his sexual orientation, which would have likely made him feel excluded and potentially even ostracized from his own family. This left Zhou feeling lost, confused, and unsure of his place in the world. As he grew older, these feelings of confusion and disorientation only intensified, and he was never able to find a way to fully identify with himself. According to a reporter on a Chinese news website, Zhou Yuping's mother was in disbelief upon hearing about the charges brought against her son. She was unable to comprehend why her son would engage in such an activity that ultimately led to his death sentence. When asked about her son's behavior and why he may have chosen to participate in the sex games, she appeared to be at a loss for words. As the reporter continued to ask questions, Zhou Yuping's mother was silent, lost in her own thoughts and emotions. When the reporter left, Zhou's mother says he was wronged and her face remained expressionless. Story 2. In Singapore, murder is one of the few crimes that warrants the mandatory death penalty, and this uncompromising stance extends beyond murder, encompassing other crimes such as drug trafficking and firearms-related offenses. Although Singapore is widely regarded as one of the safest nations in the world, despite its stringent measures against criminals and firm stance on capital punishment, every now and then, one hears about a horrifically violent act of crime. On May 11, 1974, the Singapore police received an anonymous call. The caller's words sent shockwaves through the entire police station, freezing every officer in their tracks. A passerby had stumbled upon a pair of dismembered legs, cruelly severed at the knees, within a public restroom located near a mosque in Aljanid Road. Within no time at all, the police were summoned to the scene, as well as a pathologist, who swiftly confirmed that the legs, unmistakably belonging to a woman, had been viciously removed only hours prior to the discovery. This left the police completely baffled, but they recognized the urgency of solving this case, particularly considering the sheer amount of media attention that it would attract. Then they grappled with a grisly realization. Just 2 days earlier, they had received a missing persons report A 53-year-old woman by the name of Kwek Liang had set out from her residence at around 8:30 in the morning. Her intention, as she said to her sons, was to visit her sister-in-law. Yet, as dusk descended and the hours grew long, there was no sign of her return to her home in Sinet Estate. Anxiety gnawed at her family as their search proved futile, prompting them to escalate their concern by filing a report at Paya Lebar police station. As the missing persons case collided with the discovery of severed legs, the police began piecing together a macabre link between the limbs and the vanished woman. Their pursuit led them to the suspected culprit's doorstep. Yet, as they approached, an overwhelming stench choked the air, threatening to reveal a darkness far more sinister than they had anticipated. This unexpected turn hinted at a depth of horror lurking within. You're listening to Haynes, an Asian true crime podcast, brought to you by MediaCorp and produced by One Up Media. This episode may contain sensitive details and graphic imagery. Listener discretion is advised. On the morning of May 9, 1974, the house of 44-year-old Simju Kiao was quiet and warm. Most of her 6 children had not yet woken up, so this was the perfect opportunity for her to leave the house uninterrupted. But as the sun began to filter through the curtains, Sim appeared in the midst of a flurry. She stood near the doorway, her hand rummaging through her bag, seemingly searching for something. At the same time, her daughter Kwek Pek Kiao descended the stairs cautiously, noticing her mother's anxious demeanor. With a tone of concern, Kwek asked about her mother's sudden departure, curious as to where she was heading. Several hours elapsed before Sim returned, and when she did, her face was marked by evident signs of distress upon entering the house. As she noticed her daughter Kwek approaching, an unexpected surge of anxiety coursed through Sim. Sim had anticipated her daughter's question, and was now scrambling to conjure a believable response on the spot. Sim's daughter Kwek wouldn't know then, but her mother was hiding a horrific secret. 53-year-old Madame Kwek Liang was the wife of a wealthy local textile merchant. Her husband was a respected figure in the textile trade, who held a prominent standing within the industry. But he was also part of a taunting scheme, which was and still is illegal in many parts of the world. The roots of a taunting scheme trace back to the 17th century. It's a hybrid of a group annuity and a lottery system. How it works is that it requires each participant to contribute a specified amount of money into a collective investment pool, from which annual dividends are distributed. The scheme operates on a morbid principle. As participants pass away, their shares are reallocated among the remaining members, augmenting the annual payouts for survivors. It only ends when the last member draws their final breath, and in some cases, the entire fund is given to the last survivor. However, the allure of potential wealth has also led to the darker side of taunting schemes. The competitive nature to outlive others for a greater share has historically sparked disputes, deception, and even tragic crimes among members vying for increased payouts. After all, smaller taunting groups where everyone knows each other very well makes the perfect setup for a murder mystery to occur. Why? That's because it creates a situation similar to being in a small group with close friends. Everyone trusts each other a lot, and therefore it becomes tricky to find a culprit if something goes wrong. Given Madame Kwek's husband's involvement in the scheme, it's no surprise that she would also be a member herself. After all, these schemes often involve close family ties, and it's common for spouses to participate in such arrangements together. According to the records, both Sim and Madame Kwek shared a good relationship. Sim was involved in Madame Kwek's taunting group, likely earning well from regular investments. But everything changed on the fateful morning of May 9, 1974. Reports state that when Madame Kwek departed from her home, nothing appeared out of the ordinary. It was just another routine day. She had mentioned to her sons that she was going to visit her sister-in-law before stepping out of her door around 8:30 in the morning. However, as the hours ticked by and dusk descended without her return, concern gradually ripened into worry within the Kwek household. Worried that something terrible might have befallen Madame Kwek, her family swiftly took action, making their way down to the Paya Lebar police station to seek assistance. They encountered an initial hurdle, as standard protocol dictated a 24-hour waiting period before filing a missing persons report. But despite this regulation, the authorities at the police station, perhaps moved by the urgency etched across the family's faces, or considering the Kwek family's high profile, decided to accept the report and list her down as a missing person. They acknowledged that there was a possible threat looming over Madame Kwek's disappearance, but what they didn't know was that she was already dead. On May 11, 1974, a disturbing discovery jolted the authorities. A pair of legs, cruelly severed at the knees, was discovered within the confines of a public restroom that was near a mosque in Algenide Road. Forensic pathologists then confirmed that the legs belonged to those of a woman, which led the police to establish a chilling link between this disturbing discovery and the missing persons report filed for Madame Quek 2 days ago. While the details about the crime are vague, the unfolding events suggest a grim narrative. The police first had to deliver the devastating news to the Quek family, before bringing each of them into the station for questioning. Within the confines of their chilling room, the statements of her family members pointed to an alarming detail. Madame Quek's last known whereabouts traced back to her sister-in-law's residence. Sim Ju Kiao, a name that once resonated with family and trust, now cast a foreboding shadow in a sinister turn of events. As news of the severed legs sent tremors through Singapore, Sim immediately made a call to her husband, Quek Huang Piao. While the exact words she said remain a mystery, the tone in her voice over the phone must have been laced with desperation and fear. When the conversation ended, her husband Quek was reported to have rushed home in a frenzy. The weight of the situation hung heavily as he stepped into the house. His senses were assaulted by the air thick with a stench of decay. What he saw made his heart pound with unease and a sense of impending dread. In his statement to the authorities, Quek Huang Piao vividly described the haunting scene. On the ground floor of their home, where they had a massive earthen jar, blood was seen slowly trickling down its sides. Nearby, a swarm of flies swirled in a dance, while an unmistakable pungent odor lingered in the air. Thank you for listening. We'll see you in the next one. On the morning of May 9th, 1974, 53-year-old Madame Quek left her home and embarked on a significant mission. Her footsteps echoed purposefully along the familiar paths, leading her to her sister-in-law's residence on Upper Perak Road. The purpose of this visit? To reclaim a considerable debt, an old sum of $2,000. Back then, this sum carried considerable significance, translating to over $11,000 in today's value when considering inflation. Such a substantial amount had the potential to completely change one's quality of life. Madame Quek and her sister-in-law, Sim Ju Kiao, had arranged to meet for a financial settlement, a planned resolution to their monetary dealings. Yet what began as a rendezvous meant for settling debts quickly spiraled into an appalling turn of events. Accounts depict an abrupt shift from a simple discussion to a scene of horror. By the meeting's end, it etched an unprecedented and ghastly chapter in Singapore's history. A horrific murder case, which marked the nation's first instance of dismemberment since gaining independence in 1965. Madame Quek's fate was beyond gruesome. She wasn't just brutally dismembered. Pieces of her body were also carelessly abandoned and left to rot across Singapore. What's most disturbing about this crime is the heinous act of not just ending a life, but desecrating it further by scattering the victim's remains as macabre markers across the cityscape. As the police uncovered evidence of Madame Quek's murder, it led them down a chilling trail that unveiled disturbing findings in locations, such as the Kalang River, and even within the confines of Sim Ju Kiao's own home. You're listening to Haynes, an Asian true crime podcast, brought to you by MediaCorp and produced by One Up Media. This episode may contain sensitive details and graphic imagery. Listener discretion is advised. In the book, The Economics of Crime, French economist Thomas Piketty mentions that in the past, the world of investing was exclusively meant for the rich, people with so much wealth and influence that it could span across multiple lifetimes. That's exactly true for people living in the 1970s, an era when access to investments or insurance remained a privilege unattainable for the average person in Singapore. While the wealthy had access to these specialized financial services, the general workforce, relying on fixed interest rates from banks and financial institutions, had limited avenues for wealth-building opportunities. You see, in those days, people felt more comfortable when they entrusted their life savings to familiar faces rather than large financial institutions. There was a prevailing distrust towards banks, even though there were no recorded instances of a bank fleeing with people's life savings. The personal connection and perceived reliability within these smaller community-driven schemes instilled a greater sense of assurance and comfort among many people, which was one of the biggest reasons why tontine schemes thrived during that period. The way tontine schemes work is very similar to that of a lottery or a group annuity. The main goal is to create a group savings fund where every participant contributes regularly, which then accumulates and generates returns, typically in the form of interest or dividends. What distinguishes tontine schemes is their unique yet slightly morbid redistribution method. As members pass away, their shares are reallocated among the surviving participants until the last surviving member ultimately receives the entirety of the fund. While it sounds promising, these arrangements are not without risks. The dependency on consistent contributions and the reliance on fellow participants' continued involvement pose inherent vulnerabilities. If any of the members failed to contribute on time or made premature withdrawals, the stability of these schemes could be compromised, impacting the expected returns. From the reports, it's pretty clear that both Madame Queck and her sister-in-law were part of a tontine scheme. In fact, Madame Queck even took a leading role in overseeing the entire operation of this financial arrangement. Some critics say that because Madame Queck was the head of the tontine group, she might have amassed considerable wealth at the possible expense of her sister-in-law. In these schemes, the organizers or administrators benefit through various avenues. They often charge administrative fees, which would either be a percentage of the total funds or a fixed amount. Furthermore, organizers usually have control over how the pooled funds are invested. In some instances, they might also claim a share of the profits generated from these funds, offering them an extra source of income besides the managing fees. Sources available don't specify the reasons behind Sim Ju-kyo owing money to Madame Queck. Yet the likeliest scenario points to Sim potentially missing a payment or two. So she must have promised Madame Queck that she'd pay up to stay in the scheme. Multiple sources indicate that Madame Queck failed to return home after her meeting with Sim, prompting her family to report her missing to the authorities. 2 days later, the police received a report about a grim discovery. A pair of legs along Alginede Road, later confirmed by pathologists to belong to a woman. This revelation swiftly led the police to draw connections between the two cases, sparking a search for Sim Ju-kyo. The following day, when the police arrived at Sim's residence, they were greeted by an overwhelming stench that threatened to repel even the most seasoned investigators. The smell was an ominous precursor to the horrors concealed within, and it lingered, thickly in the air, almost suffocating. Inspector Daniel Tan from the Special Investigation Section confronted Sim, who he described to have a nervous, yet determined look on her face. "I want to tell you everything," she uttered, a voice unwavering, as she cast a glance towards the ground. To the police, this was an act of confession, and she was immediately arrested. Sim led the authorities to the spots where she had concealed Madame Queck's belongings. With each step, the tension escalated, the weight of the unfolding revelations palpable in the air. Then, with an eerie calmness, she led Inspector Tan into the kitchen. And there in the corner, she pointed to a chopper that was used to dismember Madame Queck. "Where did you do it? Where did you cut it off?" Inspector Tan asked with a firm voice. She directed him to the bathroom, admitting to the gruesome acts that took place within. Yet, as Inspector Tan carefully examined the bathroom, skepticism began to creep in. Looking at the walls and the crevices in the bathroom floor tiles, there were no signs of blood to be found. Online, there are very few photographs that depict Sim Ju-kyo's appearance. Among the few available, one particular image captures her emotive moment. Tears streaming down her face as she's escorted out of court upon receiving her sentence. Captured in the photograph, she appears with short shoulder-length hair and dons a sleeveless patent shirt. Her hands shield her eyes while she turns away from the camera as the photographer snaps the photo. Sim appeared reluctant to be photographed, possibly aware of her actions or feeling ashamed for being caught in a lie, especially after her own daughter called her out to tell the truth. On the day of the murders, May 9th, Inspector Tan called Sim in for questioning as Madame Queck was last seen at her residence. At the time, no one knew about Madame Queck's death or Sim's connection to it. Hence, Sim was merely requested to visit the station and give a statement on the missing persons case. As Sim faced the interview, her daughter sat outside the room, probably because there was no one at home to look after the child. It was not uncommon during the 1970s for parents to bring their children along in such situations. However, in this case, it might have cost Sim's freedom, as it was her daughter who alerted the authorities about her mother's lies. As Sim conversed with the police, her daughter could overhear their exchanges and noticed a conflicting story emerging. Her mother, Sim, was lying to the police. Then came a sudden knock at the door, interrupting their conversation. Reports suggest that Sim had shared 2 different accounts of the incident with her daughter, Queck Pek Kia. Initially, she mentioned that Madame Queck had arranged to meet her at a bus stop intending to resolve a financial issue. However, a car suddenly arrived carrying a man and a woman. Madame Quek invited Sim into the car, but Sim declined. Later, she altered her story, stating that Madame Quek had visited her home accompanied by a couple. According to Sim, a disagreement over money later escalated between the couple and Madame Quek. Sim alleged that the man then attacked Madame Quek with a knife and punched her in the eye when she attempted to intervene. In response, she ran out of the house and upon her return, found it empty. Inspector Tan then accompanied Sim to her residence, but found no discernible odor or evidence of foul play. This was the same day that Quek was reported missing, but 2 days before the discovery of her dismembered legs. The timeline raised questions about the circumstances leading to Quek's demise and the subsequent dismemberment. Did Sim cut off Quek's legs on the day of the murders and conceal them immediately? Or did she wait for 2 days before she began the dismemberment? On May 11, 1974, Sim was promptly arrested and eventually confessed to the crime. With mounting evidence and being called out for lying by her own daughter in front of the police, Sim had no option but to reveal the truth. She guided the police to the various locations where she committed the crime and where she had hid the rest of the body. However, the police were completely unprepared for the horrific truth. Sim hadn't just dismembered Madame Quek into 2 parts, but into multiple pieces. She first led the police to a massive earthen jar placed on the ground level, and upon opening it, she took out a plastic bag that had the logo of the renowned department store, Yao Han. The bag bore dried blood stains and emitted a strong pungent odor. Upon opening it, they discovered Madame Quek's upper torso inside. Later, a similar plastic bag was found in another jar upstairs near the kitchen, which contained the lower portion of Madame Quek's torso. As Sim was leading the police around the house, another team of investigators scoured the streets of Singapore in search of the remaining body parts, particularly the head and the arms. Right when they were on the verge of calling off the search, their efforts were rewarded when they detected a foul odor emanating from the vicinity of the Kalang riverbank. Tracing the stench, it led them to a cardboard parcel along the riverbank within which Madame Quek's head and arms were discovered. During the police interrogation, Sim made a grisly confession to the sequence of events. She claimed that when Madame Quek visited her home to collect the money she owed her, an argument broke out between the 2 women. Madame Quek was extremely firm that she would be collecting the money, and as their voices grew louder, Sim's apprehension soared. Suddenly, a surge of rage seized Sim, and her hands tightened around Madame Quek's neck, a desperate attempt to quell the escalating confrontation. Eventually, Madame Quek collapsed and lay motionless, leaving Sim to grapple with the horrifying reality. Driven by desperation, she resorted to a chilling method, employing a meat chopper to gruesomely dismember the body, forcefully hammering it down with a block of wood. She claimed to have witnessed fishmongers at the market employing a similar technique to cut their produce, and used the same technique to dismember Madame Quek's corpse. However, Inspector Tan's observation of the absence of bloodstains in the bathroom raises intriguing questions. Did she conduct the dismemberment elsewhere, or did she meticulously sanitize the bathroom to erase any traces of her heinous act? On May 13, 1974, news of the murders spread throughout Singapore, and the air outside the Supreme Court buzzed with anticipation. Approximately 500 onlookers had gathered, hoping to catch a glimpse of the cold-hearted killer. Sim was eventually brought into the stark confines of the courtroom and charged with first-degree murder. A week later, on May 20th, a second mention of her case led to Sim being remanded for psychiatric evaluation at Woodbridge Hospital. By July 30th, a 2-day preliminary inquiry convened, which ultimately determined her committed to stand trial. 6 months later, Sim, in a courtroom heavy with a weight of anticipation and scrutiny, faced a verdict. Convicted of manslaughter and deliberately concealing evidence, Sim Joo Kyo was sentenced to 10 years in prison. At only 45 years old when she was jailed, Sim would have been released at 55. Today, Sim would be 94 years old. However, her current status, whether she's dead or alive, remains shrouded in mystery. Story 3. In the autumn of 1942, journalist Rajkumar Keswani penned a series of prophetic articles. These weren't just ordinary stories, they were dire warnings about an impending catastrophe looming over Bhopal. Keswani's focus? A Union Carbide plant which, in his view, was compromising safety by cutting corners. His words painted a grim picture of negligence that could spell disaster for the city. Yet his alarms fell on deaf ears. Friends and readers dismissed his articles as exaggerations, more sensational than substantive. Even Keswani himself might have doubted his sanity had he not been so convinced of the facts. Born on November 26, 1950, Keswani hadn't always been the harbinger of Bhopal's potential doom. His journalistic journey took a pivotal turn in 1981, when a plant worker, Mahabharat Ashraf, approached him with a chilling revelation. Ashraf, an employee at the plant, spoke of grave dangers posed to the public. His account included disturbing details, hidden leaks, negligent cover-ups, and threats to the safety of the plant workers themselves. Initially, Keswani was skeptical. Union Carbide, an American corporate success story, didn't quite fit the profile of a reckless operator. The idea that such a renowned company could be so grossly negligent seemed far-fetched. But the story took a grim turn by the year's end. The same man who had warned Keswani, Mahabharat Ashraf, met a tragic fate. In a horrific accident, liquid false genes spilled onto him. In a panicked state, he removed his safety mask, inhaling the toxic vapors. His death was swift and shocking. The incident was a chilling wake-up call for Keswani. His subsequent research uncovered disturbing facts. False gene wasn't just toxic, it was lethally efficient, historically used in the gas chambers of World War II. Yet even false gene paled in comparison to something far more deadly. Methyl isocyanate, or MIC, and the Union Carbide factory was brimming with it. Keswani's fear escalated. If Ashraf's warning held any truth, Bhopal was a ticking time bomb, akin to an imminent gas chamber explosion. Fueled by this realization, Keswani embarked on a mission to alert the city. His articles grew increasingly fervent in their warnings. Save, please. Save this city. Bhopal's sitting on the brink of a volcano. If you don't understand, you all shall be wiped out. In 1985, these prophetic writings would transform Keswani into the youngest recipient to ever win the B.D. Goenka Award, one of the most prestigious in Indian journalism. Yet on the day of his recognition, he might have wished his predictions were wrong. On December 2, 1984, the Bhopal Union Carbide plant catastrophe unfolded, becoming the world's worst industrial disaster. Unleashing unprecedented devastation, the catastrophe claimed a toll far surpassing the combined casualties of both the September 11th attacks in the U.S. and the Chernobyl disaster in Ukraine. This morning, authorities now say the toxic gas that escaped from the Union Carbide plant on Monday has killed at least 1,600 people, against another 15,000 in the UK summer. From One Up Media, this is Mass Murders. Bhopal, the capital city of Madhya Pradesh, is affectionately known as the City of Lakes. Its picturesque landscape is dotted with numerous natural and artificial lakes, lending it a unique charm. In the 1970s, Bhopal began to emerge as an industrial hub, particularly as India started to open its doors wider to foreign investors. Its strategic location in the heart of India, with prime access to major railway lines, made it an ideal spot for manufacturing and domestic distribution. A relatively less populated area of Bhopal was earmarked for industrial development. This zone caught the eye of a major investor, Union Carbide Corporation. Originating from the era of World War I, Union Carbide had carved out a significant role in diversified industrials. Over time, it transitioned to become one of the early pioneers in consumer-centric approaches, using market research to innovate. It was Union Carbide that developed the Eveready brand, making strides in the battery market. Union Carbide's foray into India began as early as the 1930s, backed by governmental support. Together, they established Union Carbide India Limited, or UCIL, a partnership where Union Carbide held just over 50% ownership, and the Indian government the remainder. UCIL was celebrated as a symbol of successful American investment in India, contributing significantly to the economy. At its peak, the company employed around 9,000 people. It was in the 1970s that Union Carbide ventured into the agricultural sector. This decision would set them on a collision course to Bhopal. During this time, agriculture accounted for about 30 to 40% of India's GDP. The sector engaged an estimated 125 million Indians, and as it expanded, the demand for fertilizers and pesticides surged. UCIL was tasked with building a facility to produce Sevin, a widely used pesticide across Asia. The original site allocated for UCIL's plant was zoned only for light industrial and commercial activities. Consequently, the plant's initial operation was intended to be a relatively straightforward and safe process, formulating pesticides from pre-made component chemicals. However, the late 1970s brought intensifying competition, placing pressure on UCIL to enhance its efficiency. Concurrently, India, recently emerging from a financial crisis, was under intense pressure to reduce imports and manage its foreign exchange reserves. Traditionally, UCIL imported the chemicals needed to produce 7. But now the company considered adopting a strategy of backward integration. This approach, common in various industries, involves a company taking control of producing its raw materials. It's akin to a restaurant not only owning the butchery supplying its meat, but potentially the farms where the livestock is raised. A pivotal decision was made. UCIL would start producing its pesticide components in-house, a move aimed at increasing production efficiency and reducing India's reliance on imports. This decision marked a significant shift for the Bhopal plant, which began producing methyl isocyanate, or mic, a key component in pesticide manufacturing and one of the deadliest chemicals known to mankind. On August 25, 1975, a pivotal decision was made regarding the Bhopal plant. It gained the license to produce mic, but this advancement came with a significant legal implication under Bhopal's regulations. Initially situated in an area designated for light industrial operations, the production of mic reclassified the plant as an obnoxious industry. This categorization mandated relocation to Bhopal's designated industrial zone, some 15 miles away from its existing site. The rationale for this move wasn't just bureaucratic. It was rooted in safety. The proposed new location, considering wind patterns, would ensure that in the event of a toxic leak, any harmful gases would be carried away from densely populated areas. However, in 1975, when the order to relocate was issued, the response from UCIL was silence. Around the same time, the director of town and planning, the very individual who had proposed this relocation, left his position for another job. In the concerning turn of events, UCIL's plant remained right where it shouldn't have been. Rather than moving, it began the very operation that necessitated the relocation in the first place. The manufacturing of mic. During this period, India was witnessing a population explosion. From the 1950s through the 1980s, the country's population nearly doubled, bringing with it the inherent challenges of rapid expansion. Among these, housing was a critical issue. The construction industry, struggling to keep pace, gave rise to a new form of dwelling. Locally known as patas, these makeshift shanty houses were similar to hunter-gatherer-era huts, cobbled together from cardboard, tin, and plastic. Contrary to what one might assume, not all these slums were illegal. In fact, some were legally recognized housing communities managed by landlords. The widespread presence of such dwellings, even today, is a reflection of India's pervasive poverty. Often the government, faced with the grim alternative of leaving families homeless, would turn a blind eye to these illegal settlements. Bhopal was no exception. With a shortage of contractors, housing began to mushroom around the city's outskirts, gradually extending farther out. On June 5, 1976, in an effort to keep up with the soaring demand for housing, development was permitted near the Bhopal plant. As the living conditions in these areas improved, they began to attract more residents, including illegal shanty homes. Before long, these makeshift dwellings encircled the factory, some even popping up right at the front gate of the plant. Incredibly, around 700 families found themselves living in close proximity to the factory, a site that was actively involved in the hazardous production of mic. In the dawn of the 1980s, the mic production facility was a bustling hub within the factory, with 3 massive tanks dedicated to storing methyl isocyanate. The anticipation was high. This venture was expected to yield substantial returns, especially with India's growing demand for agricultural products. But reality took a different turn. Over the past few years, farming yields have been disappointingly low. Farmers grapple with droughts, unpredictable monsoons, and subpar infrastructure. These challenges push them towards mounting debts, leaving little room for investments in pesticides. The UCRL plant, once envisioned as a landmark investment, was inching dangerously close to becoming a financial black hole. The initial thought was to dismantle the plant, to either resell it or integrate its parts into other Union Carbide facilities. However, this plan hit a dead end. There were simply no takers. Faced with this predicament, the decision was made to slash costs, in hopes of weathering the storm until the demand for pesticides revived or a buyer emerged. What unfolded over the next 4 years, starting in 1980, was a gradual yet significant transformation. It began almost imperceptibly, with a slight reduction in staff. This was likely a test to gauge the factory's operational capacity with a leaner team. Slowly but surely, the workforce dwindled, eventually halving in size. The impact of these cuts was most tangible in the mic unit. The team, once robust, was now pared down to a mere 6 members. Each individual was burdened with twice their previous responsibilities, but it was the maintenance crew that bore the brunt of these reductions. Their team of 6 was reduced to just 2, effectively tripling their workload. The control room, that was once a hub of coordinated activity, became a solitary place. A single operator was now expected to stand watch over a sea of 70 panels, indicators, and controls. To make matters worse, these tools were ill-maintained, not always able to provide an accurate reading. Safety training, once a comprehensive 6-month program, was now a 2 weeks crash course. The rest were rewritten as slogans or buried in a safety manual written in English, a language that the operators were not familiar with. Their cost savings push was viewed as a success. Famously, a Union Carbide memo boasted of having saved $1.25 million, but it cautioned that future savings would not be so easy. But as the dust settled on these drastic cost-cutting measures, a realization dawned upon one of the higher-ups. Amidst the array of trimmed expenses and downsized operations, there remained one last, untapped area for savings: the refrigeration unit for the mic. The volatile nature of mic was no secret. Known for its danger to react at higher temperatures, maintaining low temperatures was critical to prevent any hazardous reactions. The refrigeration unit played a pivotal role in this safety measure, keeping the mic gas relatively inert and stable. With a contemplative pause, the higher-up made his decision to turn off the refrigeration unit and carve out an additional savings of $37 a day. From 1980 to 1984, aggressive cost-cutting measures were implemented. But this period also saw emerging warning signs that couldn't be ignored. In 1981, tragedy struck. A worker had tragically lost his life after being splashed with phosgene. This was a human error, yes, but one that could have been prevented with proper briefing. This was crucial because the worker, unable to read, couldn't consult the safety manual himself. A year later in 1982, a safety audit conducted by the Union Carbide's American team uncovered 61 hazards in the plant, 30 of which were deemed critical. Alarmingly, 11 of these hazards were directly related to the mic units. And despite the serious nature of these findings, the audit failed to result in any enforced actions at the plant. Over the next few years, the plant witnessed at least 6 more significant gas leak incidents. Each time, operators would resume as normal shortly after. You might wonder why the plant remained operational amidst such glaring safety concerns. Well, the context is key here. Compared to other factories of the time, USL was actually seen as more stringent in its safety measures. For perspective, one steel factory recorded 25 fatalities in a single year. In contrast, UCIL, with just 1 fatal incident to date, was perceived as comparatively safer. However, what the authorities failed to recognize was the vast difference between manufacturing steel and handling mic. One of them built structures. The other, if mishandled, has the potential to kill everyone in it. It's 11 p.m. on December 2nd, 1984. In just an hour and a half, the world will witness the most catastrophic industrial disaster in history. On this seemingly ordinary night, a storage tank, E610, filled with mic, starts showing pressure levels 5 times higher than normal. This should have set off alarms, prompting immediate investigation. But after years of experiencing defective readings with no real danger, workers dismissed it again. Half an hour later, at 11:30 p.m., workers near the mic area began to feel a burning sensation in their eyes and throats. It's a familiar discomfort, a minor annoyance they've learned to live with due to frequent minor leaks around the factory. They report the irritation, but the response is sluggish. They've been down this road before, and it's never led to anything serious. Then at 12:05 a.m., a plant supervisor decides to check the control room readings. Pressure, temperature, everything appears normal. But truthfully, the readings could be just as defective as they've been in the past. It's a possibility that's been overlooked far too often. Just 20 minutes later, something extraordinary happens. The sensors, unresponsive for years, suddenly spike to their maximum readings. The temperature inside the tank has risen to a level that renders the mic extremely volatile. Checking the pressure gauges, the team discovers a similarly alarming trend. The pressure is recorded at 26 times its normal level. Clearly, something is gravely wrong. Down by the mic storage tanks, the thick concrete slabs that encase them start to crack under the strain. Tremors ripple through the area, the intense vibrations causing fissures to spread across the walls. As the temperature around the tanks climbs, the danger becomes unmistakable. The mic gas has turned volatile. A loud hissing noise erupts, a sign that the gas is forcing its way through the plant's pipes. Now it's 12:30 a.m. The plant team springs into action, activating the facility's multi-layered safety protocols. In a factory dealing with hazardous gases, these safety systems are designed to compensate for one another should one fail. The first line of defense, the refrigeration system meant to keep the mic cool, has already been compromised. However, there is still hope in the vent gas scrubbers, massive vents filled with caustic soda designed to neutralize the toxic gas. But the control panels show no activity. The mic gas has bypassed the scrubbers, continuing its ascent unaffected. The final safeguard is the flare tower, intended to burn off any escaping gas and render it harmless. Yet inexplicably, it fails to activate. The pressurized mic surges through the pipelines, eventually spewing into the night sky. As the gas escapes, the plant supervisor realizes the magnitude of the disaster unfolding. Even a mere 0.01% concentration of mic in the air can be lethal. But tonight, a staggering 40 tons of mic is being unleashed upon Bhopal City. Thank you for listening. We'll see you in the next one. It was 1 a.m. on the 3rd of December, 1984. The night was unusually restless, pulsing with a growing sense of urgency. In Bhopal, Police Chief Swaraj was startled awake by a phone call that shattered the stillness of the night. On the other end, a town inspector's voice was laden with panic. "Chief, it's chaos out here. Everyone's running." Swaraj, still groggy, responded, "Slow down." What's happening?" "You don't understand, Chief. It's complete madness." The inspector described a nightmarish scene unfolding in the Chola neighborhood, just 2 kilometers from the Union Carbide India Limited UCIL plant. An invisible choking gas was seeping into homes, sending residents fleeing in terror. Soon enough, the tidal wave of fear and confusion reached Swaraj's doorstep. Stepping outside, he witnessed a horrifying spectacle. People running frantically, a mother inadvertently dropping her baby in the chaos. Swaraj rushed to pick up the infant, only to discover the child had been tragically trampled in the panic. The mother was nowhere in sight. This heartbreaking moment made clear the gravity of the situation for Swaraj. Immediate action was necessary. Seeking answers, he contacted the UCL plant. Between 1:25 p.m. and 2:10 a.m., he repeatedly called, but the responses were unsettling. Twice they assured him, "Everything is okay," a reassurance that felt increasingly hollow and infuriating to Swaraj. Clearly, everything was far from okay. People were dying on the streets. In a desperate bid for clarity, he called the plant one more time, pleading for any information about what was causing the pandemonium. After a tense pause, a voice on the other end admitted, "Sir, what has happened, sir?" From One Up Media, this is mass murders. Suffer serious after effects, such as blindness and sterility. Mic, or methyl isocyanate, is a compound of extreme lethality. It's so toxic that even a minuscule concentration of 0.01% in the air can be fatal. The initial symptoms of mic exposure are deceptively mild, starting with irritation to the eyes, respiratory system, and skin. But as the exposure intensifies, the effects become far more severe. The body, in a desperate attempt to combat the chemical, floods affected areas with fluid, causing swelling, known medically as edema. When this occurs in the lungs, it leads to respiratory edema, effectively destroying the lung walls and resulting in pneumonia. In other words, mic exposure is a nightmarish way to die, essentially drowning victims in their own bodily fluids. The full mechanism of how mic ravages the body remains a mystery to scientists. This lack of understanding means there is no known cure for mic exposure, placing it among the most deadly chemicals known to humanity. At around 12:30 a.m., as the 40 tons of mic began its deadly descent, a southeasterly wind caught and carried the toxic cloud over Bhopal's residential slum colonies. The concentration of mic was so high that an estimated 3,800 people succumbed almost instantly. As the wind continued its course, it swept through Bhopal, leaving a trail of devastation in its wake. Buffaloes, cows, dogs, and birds fell victim to the gas. Eventually, the cloud reached the heart of Bhopal, a city teeming with 1 million inhabitants. The survivor accounts from that fateful night in Bhopal are nothing short of harrowing. Around 12:30 a.m., it was the cries of children that first signaled something amiss. Awakened by their own coughing and cries of discomfort, these young ones inadvertently alerted their families to the looming catastrophe. Initially, some mothers thought the irritation might be due to chilly smoke from late-night cooking. They comforted their children, urging them back to sleep. But soon, a chilling realization dawned on everyone as a thin, white veil of gas descended over Bhopal. By then, it was tragically too late. Those who experienced it recalled the sensation as agonizing. Breathing felt akin to inhaling fire. Their eyes burned as if smeared with chili. Confusion reigned. Why were their eyes tearing? Noses running and mouths frothing? The horror of the situation was unfathomable. In desperation, people did the only thing they could. They fled. They ran, placing their hopes to outpace the deadly fog enveloping their city. Amidst this chaos, eyewitnesses recounted seeing others overcome by the gas. Vomiting, gagging, convulsing, even as they tried to escape. Many collapsed, suffocating, their lungs overwhelmed by the toxic cloud. The tragedy was particularly acute for the children. Mic is about 40% heavier than air. This means its concentration was deadliest closer to the ground. Heartbreakingly, many perished even as they were being pulled to safety by their families. As the night turned to chaos, the fleeing crowds diverged. Some headed towards the railways, desperate for any means of escape, while others rushed straight to the city's Hamidiya hospital. It's now a little past 2 a.m. and Hamidiya Hospital was in a state of chaos. Its corridors flooded with victims suffering from an unknown affliction. Their symptoms, teary eyes, relentless vomiting, and labored breathing puzzled the medical staff. The puzzle started to form a picture when a call came through from the authorities. They suspected chemical exposure. The exact substance unknown, but likely an irritant. Gaseous irritants typically cause burning sensations in the eyes, nose, and throat. It seemed a plausible explanation. The initial medical advice was straightforward. Use milk, eggs, water, and eye drops for treatment. However, as the night deepened, it became evident that these remedies were futile. The victims' conditions worsened, not a single one showing signs of recovery. In a desperate bid for answers, the state's director of public health, Negu, reached out to a family doctor. The dire situation was escalating by the minute. The hospital began to resemble a war zone, with the influx of patients turning into casualties, the numbers escalating into the thousands. Finally, at 3:30 a.m., Police Chief Swaraj received the critical information. The chemical that was causing this catastrophe was methyl isocyanate, Mike. He immediately relayed this crucial update to the hospitals. The delay in identifying the chemical compound proved to be a crucial misstep. While there was no known cure for the effects of Mike, there were simple, yet effective measures to minimize its impact. If only they had been communicated in time. A basic action plan could have made a significant difference. Something as simple as covering one's face with a wet cloth, staying indoors, and barricading doors with wet towels could have dramatically reduced the exposure to Mike. Tragically, this vital information remained unknown to both the administration and the residents of Bhopal. In a state of panic, the people unknowingly did the opposite of what could have saved them, leading to widespread and devastating exposure to the toxic Mike. As dawn broke, the harrowing aftermath of the Mike disaster gradually unfolded before the eyes of Bhopal. Streets that were once bustling with life now lay eerily silent, lined with the lifeless and those struggling for life. The hospital, overwhelmed by the scale of the catastrophe, ran out of room. The backyard became a makeshift morgue, filled with rows of bodies. The tragedy extended beyond humans. Cows and other animals, victims of the lethal gas, lay motionless, unsettlingly frozen in their final pose. In the wake of this devastation, as Bhopal braced itself for the daunting task of recovery, a critical question loomed. How had 40 tons of Mike been released into the air? It was perplexing. The factory, specifically designed to handle such hazardous substances, was presumed to have multiple layers of safety measures. What could have led to such a catastrophic breakdown? How could every safeguard have failed simultaneously? The investigation into the Mike gas leak unfolded rapidly, unearthing critical details. Focusing first on the compromised Mike tank, labeled E610, investigators encountered a telling sign. A powdery residue within the tank, tinged with iron, a substance that probably came from the internal piping. When this scenario was recreated in a laboratory, a startling discovery emerged. Mike, when mixed with water and traces of rust, triggered a reaction identical to the one factory workers had witnessed that fateful night. It seemed that water had somehow seeped into the Mike tank, picking up rust along its path. This combination sparked what chemists refer to as a runaway reaction. Essentially, it's a reaction that gains unstoppable momentum, escalating rapidly, and placing immense strain on tank E610. Under such intense pressure, the tank's emergency pressure release valve couldn't hold. It shattered, sending the deadly gas spewing out through the emergency venting system. This sheds light on how the catastrophic gas was formed, but another crucial question loomed. How did the Mike manage to escape in the first place? In any factory dealing with toxic chemicals, layers upon layers of safety measures are standard. For such a gas leak to occur, it meant that multiple safety systems had to fail simultaneously. In the aftermath of the Bhopal disaster, investigators meticulously combed through factory schematics and conducted interviews, piecing together a chilling narrative of systemic failure. One key safety feature in the plant's design was the slip line, a metal plate engineered to create a watertight barrier between pipe sections during maintenance. Shockingly, on that fateful night, this essential component was missing, leaving an open gate for water to pour into the Mike tank. But there were more layers of protection, or at least there should have been. The Mike tanks were designed to be pressurized with inert nitrogen gas, forming a protective shield. However, as workers revealed, this system had been malfunctioning for weeks, a severe issue that had somehow slipped under the radar. The faulty valve meant to retain the nitrogen gas now could provide another pathway for water to infiltrate the Mike tank. As the investigation progressed, the extent of negligence continued. The plant's vent gas scrubber, a crucial defense mechanism against gas leaks, was found to be non-functional. Workers confirmed they had seen no sign of its operation. Furthermore, the flare tower meant to incinerate any escaping Mike gas was also inoperative. A vital section of its corroded pipe had been removed and not replaced. The final safeguard at the plant, a water spray system, intended as the last line of defense against escaping gas, tragically fell short. Investigators revealed that the water sprayers were too small and ineffectively positioned, unable to neutralize the escaping gas. The sheer coincidence of all 5 safety layers, the seal, nitrogen gas, scrubbers, flare tower, and water spray being carelessly ill-maintained seemed to suggest a larger root cause. It was clear to those on the ground, under mounting pressure to cut costs, USIL had compromised on critical training and investment in safety measures. Yet as the investigation neared its conclusion, one pivotal question transformed the Bhopal disaster into a focal point of intense debate. Investigators agreed that a runaway chemical reaction had produced a lethal gas. However, calculations indicated that initiating such a reaction would require around half a ton of water, a volume seemingly improbable unless introduced deliberately. So the pressing question arose: who introduced the water into the system? Outside, vultures devour the carcasses of animals killed by the fumes. Doctors are working around the clock at hospitals that are filled to overflowing. India's investigative team reported that at around 9:30 p.m., workers were conducting a routine flushing operation. Midway, they ran into an unexpected issue. The water wasn't flowing out as it normally would. In an effort to resolve this, they may have pumped more water than they should, which seemed to fix the flow problem. However, unknown to them, this led to a backlog of water accumulating silently, eventually finding its way directly towards the Mike storage unit. This theory, widely accepted at the time, was both credible and easy to grasp. Yet, it had a significant shortcoming. It couldn't be replicated in practical experiments. This left a gaping hole in the narrative, brimming with doubts and unanswered questions. Up to this point, the Indian government had maintained a tight grip on the investigation, a common practice in managing large-scale disasters. The idea is to limit interference, especially from parties with potential biases or agendas. Introducing Union Carbide Corporation, or UCC, into the mix was risky. They were understandably eager to clear their name, but their involvement could potentially skew the investigation. However, when UCC was eventually granted access, they unveiled a different perspective. According to their findings, plant logs had been tampered with, some altered, some destroyed. Separate interviews with employees yielded inconsistent accounts. This led UCC to propose a new theory: sabotage by a disgruntled employee who inadvertently escalated the situation beyond control. Ultimately, the Indian Legal Council did not pursue the sabotage theory. Instead, The Indian government passed the Bhopal Gas Leak Act in March 1985. This legislation allowed the government of India to act as the legal representative for the victims, initiating proceedings against Union Carbide. The ensuing legal battle saw claims skyrocketing to $33 billion. But in a dramatic turn of events, a settlement was reached in February 1989. Union Carbide agreed to an out-of-court settlement of $470 million, a figure that was significantly lower than the initial claims. For those well-versed in the medical costs of Bhopal, this figure might seem sufficient at first glance, theoretically covering up to 5 years of medical expenses. However, as time passed, our understanding of the long-term effects of mic exposure sadly tells a different story. Within the first 6 months, it became evident that symptoms like constant tearing and breathing difficulties weren't fleeting. Those who suffered more severe consequences, like blindness, faced a lifetime of impairment. Some would tragically succumb to their ailments. As years unfolded, a more disturbing picture emerged. People began experiencing a gradual breakdown of their central nervous systems, affecting speech, learning, and motor functions. Even those who initially seemed to escape the worst health impacts weren't spared entirely. By the early 2000s, it was revealed that their children had a 7-fold increased risk of birth anomalies. Then came the COVID-19 pandemic. For the survivors of the gas tragedy, their vulnerability was apparent. They experienced a death rate 6.5 times higher than those who had not been exposed to the gas. And yet our understanding continues to evolve. New issues and health challenges are still emerging among the new generation of survivors, a poignant reminder of the disaster's lasting impact. On that fateful night of December 2nd, 1984, as the gas enveloped the city, the scale of the disaster was beyond comprehension. Many victims couldn't be identified as entire families, neighbors, and communities who might have recognized them were gone. The scale of exposure was staggering, culminating in what we call mass murder. It's estimated that 500,000 people were subjected to varying degrees of exposure to mic. In the years to follow, around 150,000 individuals would continue to grapple with the lingering effects of this exposure. Tragically, at least 25,000 lives would be lost as a direct consequence of this catastrophe. In just one harrowing night, countless lives were extinguished, leaving behind a void where once there were vibrant communities. There was no one left to recall their names, their stories, their dreams. Entire existences wiped away, with only the echoes of their memory remaining. Story 4. In the midst of Hong Kong's bustling cityscape, where the pulse of life reverberates through crowded streets and towering skyscrapers, lies an unexpected oasis. Despite being among the most densely populated cities globally, nearly 40% of the city is shrouded in untamed beauty, a tapestry of uninhabited hilly parks that cut through the city. These pockets of wilderness, crisscrossed with a labyrinth of hiking trails, offer residents a break of nature whenever they feel overwhelmed by the city's bustling rhythm. But it's not just the breathtaking scenery that captivates them, it's the proximity, the knowledge that within a stone's throw from their homes lies a haven, an escape into the embrace of nature's tranquility. The hills were beautiful, and the allure was undeniable. Among these hills lies Braemar Hill, 200 meters above the southern edge of Hong Kong Island. The north and west of this hill is primarily made up of private upmarket real estate, making Braemar Hill one of the more affluent neighborhoods in Hong Kong due to its prime location. Amidst the tranquility of this neighborhood, on the 20th of April, 1985, a fateful afternoon unfurled. Kenneth McBride and Nicola Myers, two young souls entwined by friendship and ambition, ventured into the landscape of Braemar Hill. Seeking solace amidst the idyllic surroundings, they perched upon a secluded pathway, part of the Tai Tam Country Park, near McBride's residence at Braemar Hill Mansions. As Nicola and Kenneth settled into the quiet hillside pathway, their minds focused on the weighty task of preparing for their A-level examinations. One could hear the soft rustle of pages turned by diligent fingers, merged with the distant whispers of the hillside breeze. Little did they know, within this peaceful moment, their lives were about to be tragically extinguished, leaving an ominous shadow over the serene hillside. Typically, violence in Hong Kong was confined within the realms of the triads, and any past instances of murder remained localized, distant from the expatriate community. However, that fateful day, both Kenneth McBride and Nicola Myers were the unfortunate victims of one of Hong Kong's most horrific and unprecedented crimes. 17-year-old Kenneth McBride and 18-year-old Nicola Myers had shared a romantic bond. They were both enrolled at the Island School in Hong Kong, where their presence was widely recognized. McBride's influence extended as the president of the Students' Union, leading the school's rowing team and contributing actively to the debate team. Revered by his peers and respected by his former teacher Chris Forsay, McBride was hailed for his intelligence and well-cherished within the school community. Myers was an intellectually gifted student. She exhibited a keen interest in languages and wanted to pursue a career as an interpreter. Described as astute and dedicated by those who knew her, she shared a close bond with McBride. But on April 20th, 1985, the couple were the unfortunate victims of one of the most notorious homicides in Hong Kong's history. Neither Myers nor McBride made it back home that fateful night following their visit to Braemar Hill, which prompted a palpable unease to settle upon their homes. The next morning, dawn ushered in a devastating reality. While wandering through Braemar Hill, a nearby hiker caught sight of a woman lying amid the tall grass in the distance. At first, the scene appeared innocuous, resembling someone basking in the sun. Perhaps out of curiosity, the hiker approached, expecting to find a sunbather, only to be met with a chilling reality upon closer inspection. The woman in the distance wasn't sunbathing. She was dead. Beside her was a dead man, presumably someone she knew. Both bodies were lifeless and horribly disfigured, a sight that sent a shiver of horror through the hiker's soul. Deeply shaken and overwhelmed by the sight, he urgently called for assistance. Shortly after, emergency responders arrived at the scene, but nothing could be done. Kenneth McBride and Nicola Myers had been dead for hours. With urgency, authorities launched an extensive search, marking one of the region's most substantial operations. More than 800 policemen, joined by British Forces Overseas Hong Kong personnel, diligently scoured the area in a meticulous quest for any potential clues or evidence. There is a photo of this operation online, which reveals the intensive efforts of numerous police personnel, numbering in the hundreds, combing through Braemar Hill and searching for clues as to what had happened. First, they focused on the bodies, but the extent of the violence inflicted upon McBride and Myers was deeply disturbing and challenging to grasp. Kenneth McBride was discovered to be tied up and gagged. His body showed over 100 injuries, and closer examination revealed several skull fractures, broken ribs, and numerous cuts and bruises all over. Authorities noted that his injuries hinted at a sustained and severe beating, possibly caused by a blunt object or weapon. Meanwhile, Nicola Myers was found to be in a more severe state. She was found half-naked, her jaw broken, and her left eyeball brutally ripped out of its socket. Upon closer inspection, it became evident that the vicious assault on Nicola had encompassed horrifying sexual abuse. Evidence pointed to a brutal sexual assault, corroborated by traces of semen found on her body. However, the most chilling revelation lay in the ghastly absence of her left eyeball, a detail that echoed unimaginable agony. One can only imagine the excruciating pain she must have endured, as the surrounding tissues and nerves were all damaged when the eyeball was savagely wrenched from its place. During the initial investigation, the police stumbled upon a pair of discarded wooden sticks on the side of the hill. These sticks emerged as the likely instruments behind the grievous wounds found on both individuals. Subsequently, torn exercise books were found scattered across the hillside, presumably belonging to Nicola and Kenneth. Later forensic analysis unveiled partial fingerprints on both the wooden sticks and the torn books, which could have helped expedite the police's pursuit of the perpetrators. However, forensic science in the 1980s wasn't as advanced as it is today, and as a result, the evidence from the crime scene and the victims was not enough to identify the perpetrator conclusively. With a limited biometric database at their disposal, the Hong Kong police were left with no other choice but to rely on their expertise and training to hunt down those responsible for this heinous act. The investigation behind the murder of McBride and Myers marked one of Hong Kong's most extensive investigations. Over 10,000 locals, including identified triad members, were called in for police interviews, yet every lead hit a dead end. The crime's shocking brutality also reverberated through the community, especially due to the rare occurrence of 2 British citizens being brutally slain in Hong Kong. The city was in disarray, and its residents feared for their safety. Hong Kong in the 1980s is vastly different than it is today. Triads and gangsters were a big part of the city scene, and these criminal groups had a secretive yet powerful presence, much like how they are portrayed in many Chinese movies at the time. In 1980s Hong Kong cinema, gangsters were portrayed as mysterious and formidable figures. They were ruthless and capable of unleashing swift and brutal retaliation upon those who dared to oppose or betray them. At the time, the prevailing fear of the triads was rooted in their reputation for committing heinous crimes like murders, arsons, and robberies. Yet the citizens of Hong Kong grew wary of their dominance. The triads were fracturing the essence of their cherished city, and it wasn't long before this fear reached its peak following the shocking murders that rattled the city. Several months after the heinous murders, the Royal Hong Kong Police received an anonymous donation of 500,000 Hong Kong dollars from a prominent local businessman. This substantial contribution was intended as a reward for anyone who could provide information that could help in solving the case. When adjusted for inflation, this amount equates to over 110,000 US dollars, a substantial sum that would have surely served as a powerful incentive. Amidst the looming shadows of the unsolved murders, whispers circulated among law enforcement about potential connections to Hong Kong's notorious underworld. As investigators tirelessly combed through leads and clues for a long 6 months, a breakthrough seemed elusive until a pivotal moment emerged. An anonymous source had stepped forward, detailing an incident where he had overheard a young gangster boasting to his gang about his role in the death of a Western couple. To further prove his claim, the young gang member was even seen donning Kenneth McBride's stolen Nike shoes. Later identification revealed the young man as Pang Shun-yi, a 24-year-old individual known to have affiliations with the triads. According to sources, Pang worked as a casual laborer and held a minor position within one of Hong Kong's most notorious gangs. His reputation preceded him as a bit of a bully and a thug among the triad circles. With the revelation of Pang's identity, law enforcement inched closer to resolving the case's puzzle. Yet they understood that Pang couldn't have acted alone considering the nature of the victim's injuries, which indicated the potential involvement of multiple perpetrators. This realization propelled the investigation forward, and now the hunt was on for the others. What the police didn't know was that a total of 5 individuals were involved in this heinous murder. In the intricate web of this case, the police would soon find out that the journey towards justice would be riddled with obstacles. The prosecution faced a daunting challenge in presenting a compelling narrative to the jury, one that could unequivocally substantiate the culpability of the 5 boys involved. While circumstantial evidence, such as the wooden sticks used in the assault and strangulation, hinted at their involvement, the critical flaw lay in the lack of concrete forensic evidence. This was a loophole that could potentially grant the boys a reprieve from severe consequences. The intricacies of forensic evidence became the linchpin of this case. Without irrefutable proof that tied the fingerprints and other forensic traces to the accused, the boys could stand a chance at walking away with light sentences, or worst-case scenario, acquitted. The police needed a decisive piece of evidence, one so damning that it would leave no doubt about the boys' culpability. And that revelation arrived in an unexpected form. Kenneth McBride's Nike shoes. That's coming up in the next episode. As the morning sun casts its golden hues upon the gentle slopes of Braemar Hill, it paints an idyllic picture, a serene haven, seemingly untouched by time. Hiking trails veiled in lush greenery crisscross this hilly expanse, inviting wanderers to embrace nature's tranquility. But beyond the picturesque facade lies a history. Braemar Hill was the location of one of Hong Kong's most brutal murders. Walking its path today, one might admire its beauty. Yet the whispers of a darker past linger in the breeze, a haunting echo of a terrible tragedy. On April 20th, 1985, Kenneth McBride, a 17-year-old student, along with his girlfriend, 18-year-old Nicola Myers, ventured to Braemar Hill in Hong Kong to study for their upcoming exams. Braemar Hill was this serene and picturesque location that was their haven for focused study sessions and tranquil moments together. However, that peaceful evening would soon give way to a scene of horror. Both Kenneth and Nicola had failed to return home that evening, and their absence prompted significant concern. The following morning, a hiker had found their lifeless bodies in the tall grass nearby. Kenneth McBride was found bound, savagely beaten, strangled, and bearing over 100 bodily injuries. Nicola Myers was discovered half-naked with a shattered jaw and her left eyeball dislodged. Evidence of sexual assault indicated that she had endured prolonged torture, with more than 500 injuries found all over her body. The brutality of the crime sent shockwaves through Hong Kong. The city had never before witnessed such a senseless murder, especially involving Western victims, which was unprecedented in the region's history. This unique scenario spurred the Hong Kong police force into action, initiating one of its most exhaustive and painstaking investigations to date. Over 800 officers from the local police force were mobilized, along with additional personnel from the British forces overseas Hong Kong, to comb through the crime scene meticulously. But despite a thorough search, the investigators recovered only a few wooden sticks, presumably used in the assault on the victims, and some scattered torn exercise books at the crime scene. Forensic examinations did uncover traces of semen on Nicola's body, alongside partial fingerprints retrieved from the torn books and the sticks. However, due to the constraints of technology at the time, the evidence collected could not help the police much in identifying the perpetrator behind this tragic incident. Amid the weight of two heinous murders with no culprits apprehended, the police grappled with intensifying public scrutiny, sensing an urgency to bring closure to the case. Then several months later, they took an unprecedented step, offering a reward of 500,000 Hong Kong dollars, the largest sum in Hong Kong's homicide history, to anyone who could provide information about the murders. Mostly contributed by an anonymous Hong Kong tycoon, this substantial offering aimed to serve as an enticing incentive. Yet the public couldn't help but perceive a tinge of favoritism. The Chinese press at the time accused the police of racism, criticizing the excessive allocation of resources and manpower to the investigation. They questioned the necessity of such extensive efforts, which sparked controversy and public debate. Some individuals expressed their reservations, questioning whether the government would have committed such extensive efforts if the victims had instead been Chinese teenagers from a public housing estate in Kowloon, and not the children of British expats. Perhaps due to the substantial amount of the reward money, an anonymous individual swiftly stepped forward and recounted an unsettling encounter where he heard a man identified as Pang Xuani reportedly boast to his gang about the brutal slaying of the two Westerners. Pang Xuani was a known member of a triad in Hong Kong and had a reputation for being a bully. He was even seen to be wearing Kenneth's Nike shoes as he proudly claimed responsibility for the heinous crime in front of his associates. Then, police discovered that the anonymous informant was a member of Pang's gang himself. He had overheard a conversation between Pang and their gang leader, during which Pang sought advice on what steps to take following the murders of the two Westerners. It's no secret that most triad members are known for their intense loyalty and tight-knit bonds, which makes betrayal uncommon. However, enticed by the substantial cash reward, this informant chose to defy his gang, revealing critical information for financial gain. In the ensuing 48 hours, police meticulously coordinated a sweeping operation to locate 24-year-old Pang Xuani, the alleged killer. Pang was apprehended and subsequently interrogated, during which he confessed to committing the murders and divulged the identities of 4 other individuals who had aided him in the crime. By 11:30 p.m. the following night, all 5 suspects were arrested and taken into police custody. According to reports, a total of 5 males were apprehended, their ages spanning from 25 down to a mere 16 years old. At this juncture, detectives were certain that they had the right people and had stopped searching for any more suspects. However, the 5 individuals wouldn't talk. Given the absence of substantial forensic or concrete evidence tying them directly to the crime, investigators knew that presenting a solid case in court would prove to be an arduous task. This prompted them to focus their efforts on securing their cooperation and obtaining confessions as their next target. During the weeks and months that followed, the suspects were held separately in various police stations and subjected to intense and prolonged interrogation. Throughout this time, investigators meticulously assembled the puzzle of events, reconstructing the sequence of actions and each role that the individuals played. Finally, armed with their cohesive narrative, they confronted the suspects with compelling evidence, ultimately leaving them with no choice but to confess. $500,000 Hong Kong dollars was the key that unlocked the tight-lipped code of silence within the triads in the Braemar Hill murder investigation. This substantial sum was an irresistible lure, prying open the walls of triad secrecy and coaxing them to step forward with critical information. In November of 1985, 7 months after the tragic events, 5 individuals found themselves on the brink of a murder trial, their fate precariously balanced as they fought against the current to prove their innocence. However, what everyone had perceived as hardened criminals turned out to be a group comprising merely teenagers and young adults. Other than a handful of minor offenses, police had never heard of the 5 suspects before. Yet surprisingly, 2 among them were teenagers younger than their victims. Reports indicate that all 5 confessed to the crimes out of genuine remorse for their victims. After all, this entire experience was entirely new to them, which must have left them scared and desperate to do anything to spare their lives. For the first time since the murders occurred, detectives finally pieced together a full account of the events that unfolded on April 20th, 1985. On the day of the incident, 16-year-old Won Sam Lung disclosed that he and 2 others spent the day drinking and dining. Later, the group of 5 convened for a discussion. This was when Pang Sun-yi, their leader, proposed the idea of stealing cables from government aerials for money. Their venture led them to the Braemar Hill aerial station. But due to the tight security around government-owned property, they struggled to gain access into the station. Frustrated by this, Pang suggested that they shift their focus to robbery instead. As they traversed the hill, they encountered Nicola and Kenneth in an isolated area. Assuming that Westerners would have money, the gang split up, positioning themselves on both sides to stage an ambush. When they approached the couple, they found that they only had $1 between them. Despite their plea to leave them alone, Pang Sun-yi disregarded their words, intensifying the situation as they resisted. Kenneth and Nicola would continue to beg the gang to leave them alone. And this was when Pang's frustration ignited, plunging the encounter into a chaotic spiral. Due to the sensitive nature of this crime, numerous details regarding the extreme violence of the murders were either omitted from mainstream reports or altered to ensure a more appropriate presentation. Yet, reports from mainland China at the time delved deeper into these harrowing details. The Chinese sources offered a more comprehensive and chilling account, one that helped readers understand the true depravity of this crime and why some people still shudder when it's mentioned today. On the day of the murders, Kenneth McBride was wearing an arm sling due to a bicycle accident he'd been involved in earlier. But this didn't stop the gang from tying his hands and feet together before subjecting him to brutal beatings so they wouldn't stick. As Kenneth fiercely fought back, Pang noticed the other members refraining from participating in the assault, presumably out of fear. He knew that he needed backup, so he proceeded to threaten them verbally to restrain him while he continued the attack. Then as Kenneth lay on the ground in excruciating pain, the gang turned him over and placed a wooden stick across his neck, applying immense force until he was motionless. This was the cause of Kenneth's death, and once Pang had realized he was dead, his attention shifted to Nicola. Reports say that she put up a fierce struggle against her attackers, yet endured brutal beatings that shattered her jaw. Subsequently, the gang took turns to rape her and perform other horrifying acts, such as inserting a bottle into her genitalia and forcibly removing her left eyeball from its socket. When she was discovered, her lifeless face bore an expression of excruciating pain and torment. As part of the investigation, all 5 suspects willingly participated in a reenactment of the crime at the actual scene, a process that was for the first time recorded on video and presented as evidence in court. However, despite their involvement in the reenactment and confessions to the murders, all but one entered pleas of not guilty to the charges. The exception was the youngest among them, 16-year-old Won Sam Lung, who acknowledged his guilt and agreed to testify against the others. Due to his age, he was ordered to be detained at Her Majesty's pleasure, which means an indefinite period of incarceration. In November 1986, the Braemar Hill murders resurfaced on the front pages of newspapers. As the remaining 4 suspects were bound for court, the prosecution presented over 150 pieces of evidence, ranging from photographs, audio recordings, and video recordings, to the murder weapon and piles of clothing recovered from the crime scene. Next, they unveiled their most compelling source of evidence, 16-year-old Won Sam Lung. As one spoke to the packed crowd, he testified against the others, revealing the specific roles of each member in the incident. It was perhaps Won's testimonies that sealed the fate of the 5 accused. Following an intense 57-day trial, both the jury and the judge delivered unanimous guilty verdicts. Pang Shun-yi, along with 2 others, Chiu Wyman, age 25, and Tam Zifun, age 20, were sentenced to death. However, since Hong Kong courts had not executed anyone for a long period of time, their sentences were automatically commuted to life in prison. As for the 2 minors, 17-year-old Chong Yaohang and 16-year-old Won Sam Lung, they were sentenced to indefinite detention at Her Majesty's pleasure. In honor of the victims, the Kenneth McBride and Nicola Myers Memorial Fund was established through contributions from their families, friends, and school. The fund aimed to support underprivileged students across Hong Kong, providing them with educational opportunities and assistance. Although the families of the victims have relocated to the UK, the fund's legacy endures, aiding up to 100 underprivileged students every single year. As for the 5 convicted killers, Pang Shunyi, the mastermind behind the crime, and his accomplice Chu, are currently serving their sentences in prison. Tam Zifan, however, passed away due to cancer in 2009. Back in 1997, following Hong Kong's sovereignty handover, changes in criminal legislation required Chief Executive Tung Chee-hwa to deliberate on the fate of the 2 remaining convicts, Won and Chung. According to reports, Won's parents reached out to the McBride and Myers families, seeking forgiveness on behalf of their son. In response, the families announced their forgiveness towards Won and even appealed for a reduced sentence. In agreement, Chief Executive Tung decreed a 27-year incarceration for Won and a minimum of 30 years for Chung. In 2004, upon release from Stanley Prison, Won conveyed mixed feelings to the press about the forgiveness he received. He vowed to rejoin society and even managed to secure clerical work in a law firm through the government's Criminal Rehabilitation Service. As for Chung, he was released in December 2007 and was hired as an inspection worker at a public utility. Story 5. On February 18, 2003, Junggangno Station, Daegu City, exploded into chaos. Within 5 minutes of the incident, firefighters arrived on scene, quickly realizing the gravity of the situation. This was no ordinary fire. It originated deep within the Junggangno subway system. Initial observations revealed that the smoke billowing from the entrance was thick, black, and toxic, indicating the presence of poisonous substances. Government-led response teams were promptly alerted, and the use of gas masks became mandatory for all involved in the rescue operations. As information began to emerge from early survivors fleeing the station, it was clear that the blaze had ignited on one of the trains, sparked by an individual, now overwhelmed by guilt and despair. Acting on this critical information, the response coordinators urgently called for additional firefighters, paramedics, and law enforcement officers to the scene. The stakes were high. If the reports were accurate, the entire subway system was at risk of turning into an inferno, with a potentially catastrophic loss of life. In total, 1046 members of various public rescue teams were deployed, accompanied by 42 ambulances. However, as the fire was extinguished, the grim reality set in for most of the paramedics. Their role would not be to rescue survivors, but to identify the dead. In the aftermath, the world would come to recognize the Daegu subway fire as one of the deadliest disasters in recent history. Tragically, the disaster was not accidental. It resulted from a series of misguided decisions by an individual and a corporation, exacerbated by insufficient fire safety measures, transforming Junggangno Station into a devastating inferno. From one of media, this is mass murders. Daegu City was always a place for tragedy. As the 4th most populous urban area in South Korea, home to 2.3 million residents, it was once regarded as the economic heartbeat of the nation. From the 1960s through the 1980s, Daegu emerged as a global force with its dynamic electronics industry, yet Daegu's acclaim extends beyond just electronics. Its humid subtropical climate, perfect for growing premium apples, has affectionately dubbed it Apple City. Meanwhile, its long-standing supremacy in the textile industry has earned it the moniker Textile City. The city's metamorphosis into a thriving metropolis wasn't by chance. It has historically been a bastion for South Korea's primary conservative party, even being the childhood home of 4 presidents. This political significance has only bolstered Daegu's appeal, drawing South Koreans in droves, eager to lay down roots and raise their families. This allure triggered a demographic boom. From the close of the Korean War in 1953 to 1985, Daegu's populace swelled fourfold, peaking at around 1.9 million. This burgeoning population catalyzed a period of unprecedented growth, casting Daegu as a beacon of urban development. However, with growth came growing pains. The city's infrastructure was pushed to its limits. Financial strains became more apparent, but the biggest common grip among its residents was road congestion. To tackle the escalating road congestion, Daegu's local government assembled a research team. Their findings pointed toward an ambitious solution, constructing a network of underground tunnels to facilitate a metro train system. This plan picked up steam in 1991, right as the city's population surged by another 500,000, highlighting the critical need to ease traffic woes. The rollout of the Daegu Metro was swift, but came with its share of obstacles. For a project as intricate as the creation of a metro line, it's imperative that safety measures are rigorously implemented, guidelines are meticulously adhered to, and a high degree of caution is maintained throughout the process. However, despite the apparent dangers, the construction phase witnessed notable safety lapses. A tragic example of this was in 1995, during the development of Daegu Metro Line 1. An accidental gas line rupture led to an explosion, catapulting a 50-meter-high flame into the sky and resulting in the loss of 101 lives. In the aftermath, Daegu's authorities took steps to bolster rescue capabilities and amend the city's gas business legislation. Yet these adjustments were limited in scope, failing to comprehensively tackle a range of safety issues, such as the fire safety protocols on metro subway platforms. It was assumed all would be well. This was, after all, a very controlled and singular incident. In November 1997, Daegu celebrated a milestone with the opening of the first 10.3-kilometer section of its metro system. By the following year, the network expanded to encompass a full 24.9-kilometer stretch, marking a significant achievement in the city's public transportation development. At the heart of this new metro line sat Unsettling Station, strategically positioned adjacent to a bustling shopping mall, making it the second busiest station in the system. Despite its high foot traffic, the station's design raised some eyebrows. Observers noted that the platform seemed narrower than what might be expected for such a vital transit hub. The layout of the tracks at Unsettling Station was also distinctive. The tracks were laid out parallel to each other, facilitating trains from opposite directions to glide past side by side. This design choice meant that the trains were in close quarters. So close, in fact, that in the event of a fire on one train, there was a tangible risk of the flames spreading to an adjacent train. At the time, the construction of the subway trains was markedly different from the advanced methodologies we see today. Modern subway trains boast a robust steel chassis, overlaid with aluminum for durability and weight reduction. The rest of the train incorporates materials such as fiberglass, composites, tempered glass, and specialized plastics designed for enhanced fire resistance. These materials are meticulously selected for a few critical attributes, primarily focusing on weight, strength, and durability to withstand various stresses. For the Daegu Metro, the choice of materials was geared towards efficiency. The trains featured aluminum exteriors, significantly reducing their weight. This design choice resulted in trains that consume less electricity, fostering a more cost-effective operation. However, the interior components lean heavily on vinyl and polyurethane fittings. While these materials contributed to resilience, they were notably prone to catch fire and burn fiercely upon ignition. The combustion of these plastics could unleash rapid flames, emitting intense heat and dense black smoke that could quickly turn toxic. In environments where plastics burn without adequate oxygen, the formation of carbon monoxide, a colorless, odorless, and tasteless gas, becomes a grave concern. This gas could bind to hemoglobin in the bloodstream, critically reducing oxygen levels and leading to internal suffocation. On Daegu's Metro Line 1, both trains operating on the adjacent tracks were outfitted with large amounts of the plastic. By the dawn of the 2000s, the transformation was evident not just in Daegu, but across all of South Korea. The nation, celebrated for the miracle on the Han River, witnessed its gross national income per capita increase more than 20-fold. Yet this impressive leap into prosperity bore its own set of challenges. The drive for relentless growth catalyzed a new era of wealth, but at a steep cost. The workforce found themselves ensnared in a relentless cycle of competition, with aggressive deadlines pushing working hours to an average of 68 per week. This shift towards a more sedentary lifestyle, compounded by the stress of overwork, brought once remote health issues to the forefront. High blood pressure, diabetes, high cholesterol, and obesity now became prevalent concerns. Today, stroke ranks as the fourth leading cause of death in the country. In November 2001, a pivotal event unfolded in the life of Kim Dae-han, a taxi driver in his mid-50s, when he suffered a stroke that left him partially paralyzed. No longer able to work and faced with escalating hospital bills, Mr. Kim's mental well-being began to decline sharply. Signs of depression emerged, coupled with recurring thoughts of death, prompting him to seek medical attention. However, his hospital stay seemed to exacerbate his plight, leading Mr. Kim to perceive his treatment by the medical staff as inadequate, a reflection perhaps of the broader issue of overwork affecting service quality across South Korea. On February 8th, merely 10 days before the tragic Daegu fire, Mr. Kim voiced a chilling sentiment. He fantasized about setting the hospital on fire. Given the choice, he also expressed a desire to not face death alone, but to take as many others with him as possible. It's now the 18th of February, 2003, and Yungang-ero metro station bears no resemblance to the inferno it would become. It's 9:53 a.m., still considered as morning rush hour, and many of the train passengers were students or young women who worked in the downtown department stores. Because of Yungang-ero's location, easily half of its commuters are regulars. Amidst the ordinary crowd, one individual stood out, not for his appearance, but for the grim intent hidden beneath the surface. Mr. Kim Dae-han, a middle-aged man, made his way onto Line 1 at Banwaldang, one stop away from Yungang-ero. With the doors sealed shut, Mr. Kim embarked on his short journey to Yungang-ero station. To the casual observer, nothing about him raised alarms. Dressed in a simple blue tracksuit and carrying a duffel bag, he blended into the crowd. A peek inside his bag would reveal nothing overly suspicious, just 2 green milk cartons. But Kim Dae-han would know something that no one else would. The cartons did not contain milk, but were instead filled with $6 worth of gasoline, a detail that would soon transform a routine commute into an unthinkable disaster. As the train made its way towards Yungang-ero, Mr. Kim's actions abruptly shifted from mundane to alarming. He began fiddling with the lighter, igniting it in a seemingly callous manner. This unusual behavior caught the eye of an elderly passenger, who instinctively shouted, "Stop." This call to action reverberated through the cabin, drawing the attention of fellow passengers to the unfolding situation. A collective effort to subdue Mr. Kim ensued, with several individuals trying to snatch the lighter from his grasp. In the chaos, one of the milk cartons was knocked over with force, spilling its contents across the cabin floor. The sharp, unmistakable odor of gasoline filled the air, confirming the passengers' fears that the liquid was highly flammable. As the urgency of restraining Mr. Kim became obvious, the scuffle intensified. In a fleeting moment of carelessness, the gasoline ignited. A dense plume of black smoke billowed forth, growing thicker by the second, with no sign of abating. Those nearest to the blaze were likely unaware of its cause, but passengers further away might have discerned that the plastic furnishing was catching on fire rapidly. For those caught in the proximity, breathing became an increasingly labored effort, each inhalation more difficult than the last. As the train came to a halt in the next station, desperate glances turned towards the exits. The arrival of their destination now carried a dire urgency previously unimagined. Back at Yungang-ero station, a sense of unease began to permeate among the commuters on the platform. Was it a haze inside? No, it can't be. As the doors slid open, the grim reality became undeniable. A man with his back and legs aflame dashed out in agony, followed by a wave of passengers coughing and scrambling to escape. It was now evident that the subway train was rapidly being consumed by fire. Within moments, a fire alarm sounded, yet the response from the safety staff was delayed. Alarms had been triggered before without actual fires, leading to a momentary lapse in the urgency. However, the situation's gravity soon became apparent to the subway control room, which confirmed a fire outbreak at Yungang-ero station. In situations of such dire emergencies, timing is everything. Smoke inhalation experts estimated that exposure to thick smoke for 5 to 10 minutes could cause irreversible brain damage. By the 3rd minute, CCTV footage revealed that the entire 3rd floor underground was shrouded in smoke. Yet amidst the chaos, there was a flicker of hope. Survivors began emerging from the station, indicating that a majority of the passengers had managed to flee the engulfing flames. It appeared to be nothing short of a miracle that most would survive this ordeal. But the situation was about to take a horrifying turn. On the opposite track, a glimmer of light was spotted, growing increasingly intense. Another train, carrying at least 185 unsuspecting passengers, barreled into the station, halting alongside the fiery chaos. Given their close proximity to the blaze, the fate of those aboard seemed sealed. A tragedy unfolding in real time, with the potential loss of 185 lives in an instant. From One Up Media, this is Mass Murders. On February 18, 2003, tragedy struck the Daegu subway system, when a severely depressed Mr. Kim Dae-han boarded a train with 2 milk cartons filled with gasoline, intending to set it ablaze. A struggle quickly erupted as passengers noticed Mr. Kim's actions. One of the cartons was knocked over in the commotion, and the spilled gasoline caught fire. The flames spread rapidly, fueled by the subway train's polyurethane interior, a material known for its flammability and for emitting toxic, suffocating smoke when burned. As the train pulled into Yungging-aro Station, the early passengers managed to escape, offering a fleeting moment of hope amidst the chaos, before the situation took a dire turn. An incoming train on the opposite track halted right next to the engulfed carriage. Given the usual passenger numbers, it was feared that more than 180 people were on board, putting them in grave danger amidst the unfolding disaster. In the wake of the emergency, several safety protocols were expected to activate, yet it became apparent that significant oversights in the platform's design compromised these measures. Under normal circumstances, the local power supply would be shut off in response to such a crisis, concurrently activating water sprinklers to mitigate the fire. Alarmingly, while the power was indeed terminated, it was revealed that the platform was devoid of any sprinkler system, a critical lapse in safety infrastructure. Furthermore, although fire extinguishers were present, their locations were not intuitively marked, rendering them virtually invisible as the station was quickly shrouded in dense black smoke. By now, the temperature on Platform B3, the epicenter of the disaster, is estimated to have surged beyond 1,000 degrees. This intense heat led to the combustion of nearly everything in its path, including facilities, signage, and the platform ceiling itself. At the heart of this inferno sat the newly arrived train, its passengers horrified as flames began to invade their cabin. Back at the front of the train, the operator received a grave directive. "Quickly run somewhere else. Go up, kill the engine and go." Grasping the severity of the situation, he acted swiftly, opening the doors to make his escape as instructed. Under normal circumstances, the successful evacuation of even one individual would be a cause for relief, a life saved in the midst of a chaos. But there's one thing you must know. The operator, perhaps out of instinct or habit, turned off the master switch and removed the key from the train. This act, while routine for powering down the train, akin to turning off a car's ignition, had unintended consequences. It completely deactivated any onboard batteries that could power the train's door mechanisms, rendering them significantly more challenging to open without specific knowledge or skill. This inadvertent action, meant to ensure safety, ironically introduced a new layer of complication for those still aboard, seeking escape from the escalating danger. On the platform, passengers from the first train frantically tried to escape. The dense smoke severely limited visibility. About half of all escapees could not see at all, while a staggering 90% had only a meter of visibility ahead. Yet there was a glimmer of hope amidst the chaos. The daily routine of the train route meant that many of those caught in the morning rush at Junggangno Station were regular commuters. It was believed that their familiarity with the station layout could guide them to safety, relying solely on memory in the absence of sight. As they struggled up the stairs to the B2 level, a cruel revelation hits them. Metal shutters that weren't here before had collapsed down upon them, sealing off familiar escape routes. Confusion and panic likely set in as they confronted this unexpected barrier. How had their routine path to safety suddenly become a trap? In public spaces like malls and train stations, you might have noticed an oddly placed door that seems out of sync with its surroundings. While it might look out of place, this door is actually a critical part of an advanced fire control system designed for such environments. This system springs into action when high temperatures are detected, triggering a fire shutter to slam shut. The primary goal of this mechanism is to compartmentalize the building, effectively slowing down the fire's spread from one area to another. This compartmentalization is vital as it provides precious time for people to evacuate safely. In the event of a fire, these seemingly random doors become the only means of escape. However, this well-intentioned system can sometimes create confusion among those trying to evacuate. Ideally, emergency lighting should guide people to safety. Yet, at Yungging-aro Station during the crisis, the emergency lights were found to be too dim. In the midst of thick, black smoke, their weak illumination was insufficient to guide the panicked passengers to safety. Moreover, the station's ventilation system was not up to the task of handling the emergency. Instead of expelling the toxic smoke, it allowed the smoke to remain trapped within the compartments formed by the closed fire shutters, significantly increasing the suffocation risk for those attempting to escape. As the fire spread from the B3 level to B2, the situation grew increasingly dire. About half of the trapped individuals resorted to feeling their way along the walls in search of exits, while others blindly followed the person in front of them, hoping they were headed towards safety. In the thick of the emergency at Yungang Station, some passengers made a critical observation amidst the chaos. The smog, dense and disorienting, seemed to snake its way along a peculiar path. Turns out, the station's ventilation system, overwhelmed and ineffective, unwittingly directed the smoke along the escape routes. This accidental guidance became an unintended blessing, leading those suffocating from the smoke directly to the exits, and in turn, creating a trail for others to follow. As the survivors spilled out of the station, a ready and alert team of paramedics and rescuers was there to greet them, quickly administering first aid to those in need. The firefighters, now equipped with gas masks, were able to approach the heart of the inferno, battling the flames with renewed vigor. The fight against the fire was intense and prolonged, lasting 3 exhaustive hours before the situation was brought under control. Yet the presence of toxic smoke required an additional 2-hour wait before the rescue teams could safely venture inside to search for and assist any remaining survivors. At 3:30 p.m., as the smoke dissipated, rescue teams began their descent into the station's depths amidst the oppressive heat and humidity. Every surface was veiled in soot. Particles hung suspended in the air, with the majority settled on the remnants of destruction. Descending to level B2, the teams encountered haunting evidence of the chaos. Smudged finger marks of desperation streaked the walls. It was a clear indication of a struggle for survival, a struggle that, as evidenced by the burnt remains, not all managed to overcome. On reaching level B3, the extent of the devastation became even more pronounced. The surroundings bore the scars of intense heat, indicative of the area transforming into an inferno. There, a grim discovery awaited the teams. Although no survivors were expected, the sight of 2 cleanly burnt train frames seated on the platform was profoundly unsettling. Everything was burnt so cleanly that it resembled a cremation. The trouble now wasn't just bringing the victims out. It was identifying them when there's almost nothing left. In the aftermath of the catastrophic event, authorities embarked on a meticulous investigation to unravel the sequence of events. This effort involved extensive interviews with survivors, analysis of the limited CCTV footage available from the station, and examination of transcripts from conversations recorded during the incident. The thorough investigation revealed that the disaster unfolded when Train 1 erupted in flames, and Train 2, which had halted adjacent to it, quickly became engulfed as well. A pivotal finding emerged. The operator of Train 2 had been instructed to initiate an evacuation, but amidst the turmoil exited the train, inadvertently removing the master key, which complicated the passengers' efforts to escape. Further complicating the escape efforts, the train's design inadequately highlighted the emergency latches, rendering them not immediately identifiable to passengers in a panic. Furthermore, the situation was exacerbated by the train's plastic furnishings igniting. The resulting intense smoke not only impaired visibility, but also likely melted the door mechanisms, severely hindering any attempts to force the doors open. The tragedy's magnitude was starkly illustrated by the discovery of up to 70 charred remains in a single carriage, many of whom were beyond recognition. To identify the victims, authorities had to cross-reference missing persons reports filed around the time of the incident, employing DNA analysis, among other methods, to determine their identities. The death toll reached an alarming 192, with an additional 148 individuals sustaining injuries. Estimates of property damage vary, but consensus suggests the restoration costs exceeded $35 million. In the aftermath of the devastating incident, as the enormity of the loss and damage became evident, pressing questions arose. People demanded to know how a single arsonist could inflict such catastrophic damage, why the station was so vulnerable to fire, and crucially, the whereabouts of the train operator during the tragedy. Authorities quickly scrutinized Daegu Metro's role in the incident and launched an extensive search for the missing train operator. For 10 hours, his whereabouts remained a mystery until he was finally located. Initially, the operator appeared cooperative. However, it soon emerged that during those critical 10 hours, he had been in communication with Daegu Metro personnel. This revelation raised eyebrows, prompting authorities to delve deeper. Their investigation hit another snag when they discovered gaps in the records of radio communications, casting a shadow of suspicion. Adding to the intrigue, the master key, central to the evacuation debacle, was found securely locked away at Anshan Depot. Despite these oddities, allegations of tampering with evidence were assumed to be dismissed. Daegu Subway released the remaining missing transcripts, one of which contained instructions from the command room to the driver to kill the car and go. This piece of evidence fueled media speculation, casting the removal of the master key in a negative light. However, it was clarified that removing the master key was in fact a standard procedure during evacuations, to ensure the train could not be operated by unauthorized individuals. As the weeks unfolded, the public was outraged over how Kim Dae-han, the perpetrator of the arson, managed to procure gasoline without raising suspicions. A clear oversight given regulations requiring gas stations to report purchases deemed suspicious. Yet more glaringly was the negligence displayed by the Daegu Metro Transit Corporation regarding safety standards. The train was found to be laden with combustible materials, and the fire safety systems were inadequately equipped to handle such a crisis. The call for accountability was loud and clear. The engineer of the second train, along with various drivers and controllers who failed to respond promptly, were handed prison sentences, none exceeding 5 years. This verdict was divisive. Some argued for harsher penalties, while others pondered whether the responsibility rested solely on their shoulders, suggesting that perhaps scrutiny should extend further up the hierarchy. Kim Dae-han, the arsonist, received a life sentence instead of the death penalty, taking into consideration his mental instability. He passed away a year later, due to a deteriorating chronic illness. In response to the disaster, sweeping reforms were implemented. These included prohibitions on carrying hazardous substances on trains and enhancements to safety standards. Approximately 13,000 fire detectors were installed across the subway network, and each station was equipped with 220 gas masks. Older trains, identified as fire hazards, were replaced with models featuring flame-resistant materials and more obvious instructions for operating safety latches. The ensuing decade witnessed a transformation, not just in Daegu's metro system, but across South Korea's entire subway infrastructure, driven by the lessons learned from the tragedy. By 2014, the efficacy of these reforms was put to the test. An arson attack by a 71-year-old man on Seoul Metro Line 3 was swiftly contained, resulting in no casualties, and the fire being extinguished within 10 minutes. As the rain gently falls and the night grows deeper, thank you for joining me here at Mr. Night Scared. True crime stories remind us of life's mysteries and the importance of staying aware, even as we seek comfort in the quiet of the night. Let the rain carry you to a peaceful sleep, and until we meet again, stay safe, stay curious, and let the night watch over you.